3D pinball on C64 is probably the first 3D pinball that I've ever played, and it's actually a pretty good one. Sure, it may not be comparable to the new and flashy ones we have now on PC and consoles, but it's challenging, the physics are decent, and it plays well too. It only features one table, but given the C64's capabilities and what the devs managed to pull off here, it's a wonder. A marvel really, and easily the best pinball on the system. Better than David's Midnight Magic or Night Mission pinball. The graphics and sound design are also excellent, and overall, if you're into the genre, you'll love it. Especially that it shouldn't have worked so well in 3D on a small system as C64 was. Action Fighter is a vertically scrolling shooter. It features 5 stages and 3 vehicles that you'll be driving. At the beginning of the mission you receive a short briefing on what your main enemy for the stage will be, and you'll need to hunt him down and destroy him. That enemy is obviously at the very end of each stage, and you start on a bike that, other than the basic shot, has no other weapons and is very vulnerable. As you shoot enemies, they will occasionally drop letters when destroyed. When you manage to collect them A through D, you will be transformed into a car. Well, your bike will. Now, that is a superior machine. Perhaps not as nimble as the bike was, but can take a lot more beating. Batman's saying that before he had his Batmobile, he drove the very same one. And other than the fact that he had to replace it after each Joker chase, he was very happy with it. So there's that. The stage is circular, and you drive it until you manage to pick up letter F. This will allow you to get to the end of the stage and jump off the ramp, transforming into the airplane. And plane can do both, shoot and bomb ground targets. Whenever you see a vehicle with Sega written on top, drive or fly into it, as it will give you one of the few available power-ups. Action Fighter is eerily similar to Spy Hunter, to the point that it looks like a straight-up clone of it. It's a pretty fun game to complete once or twice, but definitely not something that you'll be playing religiously. There are 2 Afterburner games on C64. This, American one, and considerably worse, terrible, awful European release. And I know that it's a game that's difficult to port to a small 8-bit system, but sometimes it's better not to attempt something rather than do an awful job of it knowing well that you can't pull it off. That said, this US release is pretty decent. Sure, it's still not on the level of some of the ports to bigger systems, but it's playable and looks okay too. In short, Afterburner is an arcade classic forward-flying, viewed from behind the craft action shooter where you pilot FA-18 Hornet and defeat what feels like bazillions of enemies. If you can overlook small shortcomings based on how 64 hardware couldn't handle sprite scaling or floating point numbers well, this is actually a pretty fun game, even if a bit more difficult than I'd liked it to be. APB All Points Bulletin is a conversion from the arcades, and it's a pretty decent one if I say so myself. It's fast moving, action packed and really fun. What? You don't say. Really? Alright. So, Batman asked me to tell you that APB was his favorite game back when he used to run his Batcave out of 3 linked C64s. Or how we used to call them, Bat64s. One monitored Gotham, one processed his criminal databases, and one was dedicated to running APB. He said that he used it to practice his high-speed octane-fueled chases, and you know what? It makes sense. Cause in APB you play Officer Bob and have to apprehend criminals. A certain number of each day. A day has set number of time ticks until it's done, but you can extend it breaking the time-space continuum by eating donuts. So yeah, if you ever wondered why some cops do that, that's the reason. To perform better and work longer and harder. To catch a criminal you have to chase him down and sound your siren at them. It works for most, but some will not stop and may require a bit of convincing. Preferably in a form of brutal shoving them off-road. If one of these tougher ones confesses, you get a bonus and the day is done. You can upgrade your squad car for all the reward money that you'll get, and other than that, it's a rinse and repeat fare. But it's a fun one, so it's not too annoying to do the same thing over and over again. Epics were the masters of multi-event sports games, but since they basically ruled over the classic disciplines, other devs, like Mindscape in the case of Aussie Games, had to resort to creating new, often over-the-top unrealistic ones. And sometimes it worked. This is one of those times. Sure, it's not on the same level of quality, but it's fun, and I think that's the most important take out of it. The included games are shooting beer bottles, throwing boomerangs, boat racing without water, yeah, you heard that right, marlin fishing, bellywhacking and beach football. Aussie Games features pretty nice and detailed graphics, high quality sounds, and if that sounds like something for you, grab a friend or even better a few, and don't be a smelly flounder, show him who's the true king of Down Under. Oh my god, cringe. Batman's telling me that the game on the subject gives him creeps. It is as if he was watching his former life, his glory days, and reliving his past mistakes. And ladies and gentlemen, it's probably the first time in weeks that he actually got off my couch for other reason than go to the toilet or kitchen. He left as apparently he couldn't bear it. Well then, we can talk freely. Batman is based on Tim Burton's movie of the same title and loosely follows its plot and my assistant's former crime-fighting career. It's composed out of 5 individual stages arranged chronologically. First takes place in a chemical plant where you chase Jack Napier in an action platformer format, fighting various buddies with batarangs and eventually dropping Jack into a pool of acid, killing him and spawning Joker in the process. Fate, it seems, is not without a sense of irony. In second, Joker's chasing you around the city, and you have to escape to your Batcave in your Batmobile, avoiding various different Bat obstacles. Third stage sees you solving a Bat puzzle in your Batcave, you're figuring out which out of the cosmetics have been poisoned by the Joker with nerve agent and need to weed them out. In fourth stage you're flying Batwing during a Bat parade, cutting off Joker's floating balloons filled with deadly gas. The final stage takes place in a Bat cathedral where Joker's keeping kidnapped Vicky Vale, and you have to save her and stop him. Batman the movie is my all-time favorite 8 and 16-bit game depicting the Dark Knight, and as a movie tie-in, it's an excellent example of a game made well. To the point that this C64 version when I was a kid is what I actually dreamt of while sleeping on numerous occasions. Meaning that when I got stuck somewhere I had dreams about it, trying to figure out how to pass the point I couldn't in real life. I better shut up though, cause if my assistant hears about it, he'll be pushing my buttons all week long saying that I dreamt about him and stuff. You know, people said get Spider-Man, he's fun, he got web shooters, scrolls walls and can help you. But no, I had to get the Man-Bat cause his name sounded more epic. Battle Chess is a unique take on the classic and timeless game. Unique in a way that the board is portrayed, where each figure is actually a character, a realistic figurine. When they're moved, they walk to the tiles they directed to, and whenever a piece takes another, an animation plays out showing the battle between those two pieces. The animation is different depending on which two are engaged in combat and whichever one of them is defeating another. It's a chess game for non-chess players that either don't know all the rules by heart or want to get into the game but find the entry point just a tad too high. In the same time, Battle Chess offers thousands of different opening moves, so on a higher difficulty levels it can pose a challenge even to most seasoned chess players. Incredibly long titled Battletech The Crescent Hoax Inception is a role-playing game with tactical turn-based combat and probably the most unusually designed game for C64 in 1989. What's so unusual about it, you may wonder? Well, the game's basically divided into 3 chapters, each of having different objectives and gameplay aspects. First is sort of a tutorial-like experience accommodating you to the controls and allowing you to earn in-game currency, which you should get as much as possible as it will be crucial in latter parts of the game. It also takes place in the Citadel, where you're a cadet and are being trained in use of mechs. During one of those training missions, the Citadel is attacked and the game mode switches to the second chapter, which is more like a traditional RPG in which you travel around looking for people to join your party, finding better weapons and items to advance the plot and also partake in numerous battles. And finally, the last chapter, which starts when you find means of entry to where the game will conclude, is a series of puzzles requiring a combination of luck and logic. If you're looking for a unique RPG experience, Battletech is definitely it. Black Tiger, aka Black Dragon, because these two creatures are clearly exchangeable, is a conversion from the arcades and an action-adventure platformer. You step in the shoes of a furious barbarian, or sandals. I don't know if they were shoes, boots or sandals really. I'll have my assistant fact check it for us. Anyway, as I was saying, you're a barbarian and your ultimate goal is to find and defeat 3 dragons that invaded the Nameless Lands. So, you'll traverse through numerous stages fighting monsters and enemies on the way to them, and as you do so you'll collect coins for defeating some of the monsters and for breaking pots. This can be used to purchase armor upgrades, weapons, keys for chests and potions. And you can also find along the way a whole range of upgrades like extra time, more life and even coins themselves. Black Tiger is a game that didn't look as if it could be converted to C64, but it was. Some things suffered in the process, like sprite sizes, music design and boss fights, but overall the experience was as good as it was possible on Commodore's little system given its technical limitations and source material. Will you like it? If you enjoyed the original, you will. If you didn't, then you know the answer already. Oh, and Batman did not move an inch obviously when I asked him, so we'll never know what shoes the barbarians wore. While Blobber is definitely not a Bubble clone, they share a lot of similarities. They are both single-screen platformers, they're both hella cute, and they're both using bubbles in one way or another within their gameplay mechanics. In Blobber, you have to shoot enemies multiple times to turn them into balloons, then pop those before they revert back to the original form and collect the items that they turn into. Every now and then a diamond appears in the middle of the screen that when collected turns all bodies into items, so it's worth to keep an eye for it. All that said, regardless of which is better, this or Bubble Bobble, it's obvious from the get-go that Blobber was a very decent game that could have been much more popular if it released commercially, and not as a game disc added to a German gaming mag. Its reach because of the distribution method, despite the overwhelming piracy in the 80s, was very limited, so now it's a sort of a hidden gem. Bushido the Way of the Warrior is a C64 exclusive. It is also set in feudal Japan and depicts conflict between two rival clans and is a side-scrolling beat-em-up and adventure mix. You're sent off to infiltrate opposing clans' fortress, so you set off to do just that. But before you leave, you get to choose one of the few different characters, each with their own unique stats of strength, stealth and wisdom. It may sound pointless in a beat-em-up, but interestingly enough, not all encounters have to end up in a bloodshed. Some enemies can be avoided or even bribed to let you pass. So you explore the fortress, searching through all the rooms for useful items and money and trying to wipe the enemy clan off the face of the earth. Make sure not to ignore the search and mechanics in the heat of the battle though, as some items are actually required to progress further. Bushido is a very attractive presentation-wise and plays fine too, but requires a bit getting used to, so you have to have a patience initially to be able to enjoy it later on. There are two versions of Cabal on C64. This, 1989's European, which is just excellent if you like the genre. If not, then it's only good. An US port that came out a year later was terrible, and we're not gonna mention it at all in any of the videos in the series. Cabal originated in the arcades and is a natural evolution of year prior's Operation Wolf's formula. Same as in Operation Wolf, you're fighting what feels like thousands of enemies coming from seemingly anywhere, even small pawns in one of the stages. But unlike in the other title, in Cabal you're not just a crosshair. Sure, you still have it for aiming, but your character is also visible on the screen, at the bottom of it, viewed from behind. So this time, while annihilating legions worth of bodies, you also have to actually dodge bullets and grenades. The change of viewpoint didn't really make the game any more difficult, even though you have to avoid being shot by hand. On the flip side, a rogue grenade thrown at the screen from the side won't kill you now, as it would actually have to drop somewhere near you. And since we're on the subject of challenge, it's in a magical sweet spot, where it's not too demanding, but in the same time not so easy that you'd go through a whole game willy-nilly running around and shooting randomly. It's perfect. If there's one thing I don't like about Cabal on C64, it's that it only offers hot seat multiplayer and you can't play it simultaneously, which is a bummer as I really wanted to show my assistant who's real badass here. Talion Software was well known in the late 80s and early 90s for putting their own spin on genres that were already well established and defined to create something new and unique, and also often very playable. Chambers of Shaolin is no different. While it released on Amiga and Atari ST, and it shines best on these stronger platforms, Commodore Sport is pretty decent too. It features very detailed, beautiful, smooth graphics, stellar sound design and novel, fun gameplay mechanics. Because Chambers of Shaolin is a versus fighting game, but not really and not at all. And yet it is. But it also isn't. I know, I sound as if I was just hit by a car, multiple times, mainly in the head, and even if I was, I still stand by what I said. The game is divided into two parts. In first, you're going through a series of 6 different tests that showcase your combat skills, specifically agility, balance, fire, speed, stick and strength. I know, fire and stick are the two obvious that don't fit. Anyway, after clearing this test, which you will, because you're you, a hero, you will have a chance to partake in a second part of the game, and this is a series of one-on-one fights with other Shaolin combatants. Your performance in the previous tests corresponds directly to your skills and strengths in these fights. Chambers of Shaolin is more of a technical fighter rather than the button mashing romp, so make sure to keep that in mind and don't expect the game to be full of fiery special attacks and explosive combos. If you don't mind that, check it out as you may actually like it. Remember Agar.io that was popular 5-6 years ago? Now Chomp on C64 seems to be something that inspired it. I have no way of confirming it, nor I care to do so, but the similarities are uncanny. If you don't remember, let me explain. Chomp is a game where you play as a goldfish starting its life in a bowl, and you have to eat other water-based creatures to grow, which will allow you to move to a bigger and filled with more fish aquarium. Rinse and repeat, while growing constantly until you'll be able to finally leave the house and eventually grow to the size that would allow you to reach the river. It's a dog-eat-dog, or more likely fish-eat-fish world though, so all the way through you have to avoid bigger fish, at least until you can outgrow it, cat spows, piranhas, fishnets and a whole manner of other dangers. It's not a especially creative game, but it's a fun, simple concept that plays pretty well. And if you just want to try something completely different than any other game, there's hardly a better choice. Circus Attractions is a multi-event sports game with disciplines based off various circus adjacent acts. It can be played by 1 or 2 players, and interestingly enough, 2 players have a special versions of some of these. You can play each discipline individually, in practice mode or as a main night show with all of them one after another. They are quite interesting too, as they're not what you'd see in a typical Epic's title. So there's juggling, which kinda explains itself and requires correctly timing your juggles to keep the balls in the air. Trampoline jumping, which coincidentally also is self-explanatory and sees you trying to jump as high as possible while pulling off tricks and somersaults. Knife throwing, and I'm beginning to notice a theme here, they all self-explain better than I ever could, but you throw knives at the spinning disc that your assistant is strapped to. I gotta ask Batman if he'd be willing, cause it sounds like a lot of fun, but it would be surprisingly difficult to attach him to a disc given how much he'd fatten up on my couch. Fourth event is tightrope walking, preferably while jumping and performing various tricks for extra points. And finally, seesaw jumping, where a group of clowns alternatively jumps between the 2 seesaws and you have to direct their jumps so they would not land on the saws or each other. Fun. Circus Attractions is pretty entertaining, especially if you have a friend with you. Sadly, 2 players is the tops that it can handle in multiplayer, but I suppose if there's more of you can alternate. It's not as good of a game as Epic's titles are, but you'll have a lot of fun against someone anyway. Citadel is a very slow, very technical shooter that rewards methodical, careful approach rather than quick reflexes and fast movement. On an uninhabited planet that is thought to be dead, 8 huge underground cities are detected, each consisting of 2 floors. You're given a remote-controlled 8-way shooting drone to explore them. To complete a level, you'll need to go between both city floors back and forth, deactivating beam generators that block the pathways. The game is filled with various enemies, both moving and stationary, and some of these only ever attack when you get into their vicinity or start moving within it, while others don't shoot at all and try to ram you. Pressing fire button twice and holding it after activates the probe that you can use to operate hostile drones, various switches and pick up items. Captured hostile drones follow you automatically and help. Citadel is not action-packed or crazy fast, but it doesn't mean that it's not fun. It's just different kind of fun. Cobra Force is a side-view horizontal both-way scrolling shooter. The aim of the game is to destroy numerous defenses around remote enemy bases so that they themselves could be later on destroyed by bombers. So you fly your AH-1W Super Cobra Copter doing just that. You can destroy these defense installations only by using missiles or bombs, and these are limited, so should be used smartly. In case you ever run out though, you should seek out landing pad, land on it and it will replenish your armament. Fortunately, Cobra Force is not a one-hit, one-kill game and you have a health meter. What? Come on man, it's irrelevant. It's a game, alright? Alright, I'll tell him. For whatever the reason, Batman's asking me to tell you that either of the solutions, so one-hit kill or health bar, are unrealistic, as it all depends where your craft is hit and what weapons are used against it. He doesn't seem to realize that it's a goddamn game and falls under so-called game logic where anything that the designers imagine is possible. But whatever, he's calm now, licking Cheetos dust off my couch cushion, so he should be grabbing his nap very soon and won't disturb us anymore. So as I was saying, your Cobra Copter has a health bar which can be replenished by rescuing POWs. When all enemies are eradicated, you have to go far right to the very end of the level where you'll face the boss guarding the path to the next stage. Cobra Force is fun, despite how badly I described it just now, and while definitely nowhere near the quality compared to best shooters on C64, it's worth at least a playthrough. The biggest appeal of original Continental Circus release in the arcades was its 3D mode, that used dedicated special glasses attached to the cabinet for you to experience the effect. Commodore's version does not try to replicate it in any way, and perhaps it's for the best, as bad 3D is really bad, and much more of a distraction than help. Kinda like Batman, who was supposed to be my helpful assistant, edit my videos, fix voiceovers in post and without any cringe and silly things I would say, and he does everything but that. Mainly helps me make sure all the items in the fridge are within date and that my toilet operates correctly and flushes well. Anyway, Continental Circus is actually a pretty decent Formula 1 racer. It features 8 increasingly more difficult races in which you'll need to place better in each next than you did in previous one to progress. First track, Brazil, only requires you to be in the top 80, but while it sounds easy enough, each next track is considerably more demanding. Especially that the game is pretty unforgiving to mistakes and any collision with another car or roadside object may actually be the difference between qualifying to the next race and game over. That said, Continental Circus in its all blocky pixelated glory is a game that rewards perseverance and practice. If you won't let the game beat you, if you won't yield to it, but will keep practicing, in time you'll be able to really enjoy it. The incredibly long-titled Count Dacula in No Sax Please We're Egyptian is a 2D adventure platformer based on British animated TV series Count Dacula. You play a titular character and your main objective is to find and obtain a magical saxophone hidden somewhere within Pharaoh's pyramid tomb in the heart of the desert. So you'll be exploring said pyramid, solving various puzzles and collecting items that all have to be used somewhere to be able to progress further. And you can carry up to 3 of these items. While going about your treasure finding business, you'll be avoiding various dangerous creatures, falling rocks and nefarious crow brothers. Count Dacula looks great and is really smoothly animated. The sound design is pretty decent too, and since I started with the presentation, it's pretty easy to guess that something else had to be amiss. And it's the gameplay. That's, while not bad per se, it's adequate at best. You seem to be going left and right, finding items and places to use them while avoiding dangers. That's it. It's fun for a little while but grows old quick. It's a good average 5 or 6 out of 10 game. Upon its release, Cyberdine Warrior was a C64 exclusive, and it's easily one of the best arcade platform shooters on the system. And if there's just one game out of this whole video that you should try out, it's easily the one. Once again, you're the hero. You're Cyberdine Warrior, a space marine, not unlike more modern Master Chief, sent on a mission to search for droids on 3 planets, Geminus, Cyrus and Arius, all the while fighting off native to these creatures and avoiding other dangers. Once all the droids have been collected, you move to the next planet with its own unique creatures and an increased number of droids to collect. Time, ammo and energy all are limited, but all can be replenished by purchasing refills in the shop, 1 per planet. Shop, not purchase. So keep that in mind. Even though there's only 3 levels in the game, there's quite a lot of exploration involved. So if you're someone who likes to search for all those hidden coin caches and solve simple environmental puzzles, you'll have a time of your life. And since you'll do a lot of backtracking anyway, there'll be plenty of occasions to do just that. Remember, however, that each level is timed, so if you're feeling that you failed to find all the droids within its constraints, or you're low on health and have to navigate particularly dangerous area, it's worth to track back to the shop, replenish what's running out, and then attempt what previously felt impossible. Cyberdine Warrior is amazing, and an excellent game for all fans of action arcade titles on C64. And if there's one thing I can find in it that should or could be improved, it's the scrolling, or lack thereof, as it's a flick screen game. But let me make that clear. It's a small speck of bad in an ocean of good. Upon its release, Cyberdine Warrior was a C64 exclusive. Dark Fusion is a single-player space-themed shoot-'em-up. It has 4 levels, each divided into 3 small sub-areas: a combat zone, an alien zone and flight zone. In combat zone you're on foot, going from left to right, fighting and avoiding the aliens, preferably fighting, cause why not. Some of them will drop power-ups, so make sure to not leave these behind. There are entry points in the combat zone that lead to alien zones, and you must enter at least 2 of these and eradicate all aliens within to be able to complete the combat zone, and start moving towards the final flight zone, in which you fly the spaceship fighting the enemies above ground. This is also where you encounter bosses. Graphics and sounds are pretty decent, though nothing spectacular, and gameplay is okay. And that's probably the worst thing about Dark Fusion, that it just is. Not good, not bad, just somewhere in between, in purgatory of game scoring. Curse of the Azour Bonds is a second in SSI's series of gold box role-playing games, and a direct sequel to Pool of Radiance. Same as in predecessor, the exploration takes place in pseudo 3D, first-person view, and encounters happen on a top-down map with turn-based combat where you can control all characters separately and not a singular unit like in Traversal. What's new in this second outing though are the 2 new classes of Paladin and Ranger. Ability to dual class for human characters and higher level for magic users, allowing them to use 5th level AD&D spells. Goldbox games are never the easiest nor most approachable for new players, but nearly always are incredibly fun and rewarding when you seriously get into them. One of my biggest regrets of my gaming life, in fact, is that while I tried most if not all of them at one point or another, I never completed either. And perhaps I should when I win a lottery and have all the time in the world to make videos for this channel and play games. What? Thanks, Bruce. Batman has kindly pointed out to me that I have much bigger chances of dying from fiery diarrhea while riding a horse through North Pole, being chased by a polar bear, than winning the lottery. So yeah. Demonskis is a C64 exclusive and a flick-screen adventure beat-em-up, in which you play as a shirtless barbarian type of a warrior, traversing through a mysterious castle fighting off various demons and creatures to rescue a beautiful maiden Alicia from the proverbial claws of a very non-proverbial demon harpy. You know, your basic theme of any 80s fantasy hero flick. Interestingly enough, Demon Harp is what my current boss's wife is in real life. She's heartless, has no respect for anyone, and acts as if the world was her own and she was the main character in the game called Life, when in reality she's just a passing part in a story of someone else, anyone really that she meets. Even though she will be remembered by all that ever met her, immortalized in their memories as a creature like no other, all because of how awful and unfriendly she is. Her only achievement in history will be marrying an industrious fellow and spawning his demon child, which funny enough is growing up to be even worse. Anyway, you're armed with magical flay that can be used in melee or to launch the ball of the chain in magical homing attack. You can also punch and kick if necessary, though it shouldn't really be. Every now and then on your way to the harpy you'll face stronger demon enemies and they need to be downed for you to progress. As soon as you kill the harpy, however, you can escape the castle to save Alicia. Graphically, Demonskis is very impressive and plays great too, so if you like Rastan type games, you'll love it. Destroyer Escort is another C64 exclusive and another amazing game. This time, however, it's a naval simulation from Microprose Software where you portray a commander of a destroyer during World War II in North Atlantic escorting ships between ports. And you have to complete 6 of these escorts to quote-unquote beat the game. So as you start, you're presented with 6 routes between US, UK, Gibraltar and Murmansk to choose from, an ability to pick the difficulty level by deciding how heavy will be the enemy presence on your way. The game is played in first-person perspective on different screens, each responsible for a different part of running a destroyer. So there's the bridge, which is your de facto command center from which you visit other screens. Then there's the map, self-explanatory, navigational screen where you actually steer the ship and have access to radar showing nearby area. Stats and damage shows precisely that, your stats and damage to particular areas of the ship. In weapons screen you control 2 types of guns, torpedoes and depth charges to defend the convoy and yourself. Destroyer Escort is really fun if you like realistic naval simulations and don't mind games that are over 30 years old. But I suppose if you didn't enjoy all this, you wouldn't be watching this video now, would you? Let me start by saying that I feel the same way about Dizzy games Batman feels about cottage cheese. He strongly believes that it's offensive calling it cheese if he can't melt it on his toasts. I know, it's odd having such strong feeling about something so unimportant, but on the other hand I dislike Dizzy games. Don't know why, there's no reason to do so really, especially that these games tend to be universally loved, but I do. Treasure Island is set on a surprise Treasure Island, and is the second title in the long-running series of mostly adventure platformer games. Your aim is to leave the island and you can do it twofold, either by finding treasures and exchanging them for parts of the boat that you'll build, or by, well, also finding gold coins, 30 of them to be precise, and bribing your way out of the island. There's a lot of game in this Dizzy as not many others offered more than one way to complete them, and if I like Dizzy games, I would have definitely recommended this one to you. Since I don't, all I can say is give it a chance and make up your own mind about it. Oh, and interestingly enough, as my assistant is suggesting, this time, unlike in other Dizzy games, Dizzy is a fresh egg and not a hard-boiled one. Meaning there's no HP meter so that Dizzy can lose a life more easily. Keep that in mind. DNA Warrior is an average horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up. It's so middle of the road in fact that I cannot really decide if it's good or bad. It sits somewhere in between and just is. But since the premise is kinda interesting, I decided to feature it in the video anyway. And while I am of strong belief that plot in shoot 'em ups is unnecessary, this one's special, as it could have been a decent base for a weak B movie. And those that have been following this channel for a while know how much I love movies that are so bad that they're actually ironically good. Anyway, a crazy professor injected you with a special DNA and DNA accelerator of his creation to make you more intelligent, which in itself is just an insult. I mean, you, my dear viewer, are one of the most intelligent, brilliant, creative, wise, not to mention good-looking folks out there. Cause if you wouldn't be here watching. And you are. Fact. Anyway, as I was saying, you were injected, but as soon as the DNA and accelerator were about to do their magic whatever, sudden explosion in the lab sent Professor into coma. How do we know that it did just by looking at him? Simple. Like I said, you're uber intelligent. You know those things ad hoc. The thing is, the DNA adite cannot be accelerated continuously, as it will eventually cause your brain's explosion. I know, sounds crazy, but here you go. Game logic. So this time, you're not just one to save the day, you're also one to be saved. To do so you'll be flying, or more likely swimming/steering a technologically shrunk ship through your veins and arteries to save your own life. You could say that you're a damsel in distress and a knight on a white horse all rolled into one. As you go about the whole process trying to find and collect 8 pieces of growth inhibitor, you'll be attacked by the white blood cells and other nondescript parts of your inner body. I told you the premise was unusual. Anyway, you'll find plasma spheres along the way to upgrade your ship and weapons, and have to keep an eye for keys that open some of the intercellular junctions. Now, I know I said that the game was in an odd place between good and bad, and the plot sounds beyond ridiculous, but the music is actually pretty good. And also devs had just a month to make the game start to finish. And if you ever worked on one, you should know that that's not something that should ever be attempted on such a short time budget. And for that alone, it's an achievement, even if one that's not particularly great. Would you believe that the aliens attacked the Earth once more? Yep, they did, and you're the only one who can save it. Dominator is a horizontally scrolling shooter with one first level being vertical. And can you imagine that when you save the Earth, all you'll get is a well done? Yep, that's pretty much it. No animation, no story, and not even a wall of text. Just well done. Other than that, Dominator is your average shooter with decent graphics and sounds and some standard for the genre weapon upgrades. It's a fun game in between other, better shooters, but I wouldn't make an evening out of it. In first Double Dragon you were saving your girlfriend, Marianne. In this, second, she's been murdered and you're out for revenge on the Black Warriors who've done it, 1980s style. And as ports from arcades go, this one's not bad. Better than the first game. There are 5 levels in it and quite a wide selection of moves for Commodore in 1989. There is a kick, punch, back elbow, spinning and flying kicks. The enemies are not very varied, but at least there's a lot of them, and you can play in 2-player co-op, which makes Double Dragon much more fun. Especially when some unplanned shenanigans occur, like hitting each other instead of an enemy. There are some simple weapons here and there, like balls on chains and darts, but while helpful, they're not necessary to complete the game. If you like the genre, you'll like Double Dragon 2, despite most bosses looking like Sloth from the Goonies. Dragon Ninja aka Bad Dudes vs Dragon Ninja is a beat-em-up originating from the arcades. President Ronnie, yes, you heard that right, Ronnie, has been kidnapped by the ninjas, and you also heard that right, ninjas, and you have to save him. In the arcades there could be 2 of you simultaneously beating the living shit out of baddies, on C64 it's just you alone. It's not something you can handle, but it's more fun fighting hundreds of enemies with a friend. The game takes place over 6 levels, each ending with a boss and each composed out of 2 layers, the lower and the top ones. And you can move between them by jumping or using ladders. There aren't many moves and attacks in Dragon Ninja and the controls take a bit getting used to, and you will have to get accustomed with them if you plan on succeeding. Graphics are fantastic. I know, some of you will disagree, but compare the character and enemy sprites in Dragon Ninja to those we just saw in Double Dragon. It's crazy. Here they're high-res, colorful and smoothly animated, and there they look like clay monsters molded by a 5-year-old high on out-of-date milk. But I suppose it may have something to do with Dragon Ninja's world being flat and Double Dragons allowing for moving in and out within the floor of each stage. All in all, Dragon Ninja is a fun game, and especially so if you like the genre. Dragon Wars is unofficially considered to be a spiritual successor to Bard's Tale games. But it's much bigger, much more feature-packed, much better and a more difficult game overall. Story-wise, it takes place in the land of Dilmun, transformed into monster-filled nightmare by a villain of the game, Namtar. You start with a party of 4 that has no weapons and no armor, nothing, and has to find a way not only to gear up, but most importantly defeat Namtar. In the process restoring the magic to the land so that the casters could use it once more. The game is played in first-person 3D view and combat is turn-based, same as in Bard's Tale. There are over 20 different skills in the game that you can develop and most importantly use. These are magical, weapon and personal skills. There's no level limitation in Dragon Wars, so while you start as a cockroach fighting for your life when in combat with even the weakest enemies, if you persevere and play well, you may end up with your characters all being Neo from the Matrix, so superior beings that are beyond stopping by anyone or anything in existence. Interestingly enough, you can at any point restart the game and use your own characters from your current save with all their levels and gear intact. Provided that they're still alive, that is. But if that wasn't enough, the freedom of choice and non-linear story is unprecedented in Dragon Wars as compared to games of the time. You don't have to go from point A to B to C and so on to complete the game. You can do anything in any order you'd like if you only managed to. Even the first city you start the game in, Purgatory, there's like 4 or 5 ways you can leave it. You can escape through Underworld or by swimming to freedom, you can fight your way through the main gate if you manage, or sell yourself through Slave Market. The possibilities are endless. So if you're looking for a deep and involving RPG that could challenge the best we have now in terms of its inner quality, cause graphics-wise it's obviously ancient, there is no better choice. While Test Drive 2 was clearly superior to the original, it was at the very best an iterative upgrade that just made things a bit better without changing the formula too much. Why change what works, you'd ask? Well, there's no reason really, other than innovation that is, and developers apparently did not care enough to innovate. Refreshed, it seems, was just good enough for them. Anyway, personally, I feel that in any test drive game you just spend way too much time looking at the broken windscreen wondering what went wrong rather than racing. And yeah, I understand that it tried to be a simulation and not an arcade racer, and for the most part it's probably one of the best semi-realistic simulations of 1989 on C64, but it doesn't mean that it's a great game. Well, at the very least it looks pretty decent and was quite popular, so clearly there was an audience for it. Fighter Bomber aka Strike Aces is a flight combat simulation where you'll get to fly one of 6 different planes against 7 different enemy aircraft and land targets in series of 16 unique missions. The graphics are pretty nice and look quite good given C64's capabilities. That said, the framerate is terrible. I'm sure you could count FPS on one of your hand's fingers. And this is as much as I will tell you about the game, because I have an intermission prepared for you. Pause the video and go to lemon64.com website, type in the game's name and click on top left in the review link. Why? Because the programmer who made the game reviewed it himself. It's not a long read and it's definitely not one praising his own creation, but it's interesting to see how the inner workings of the machine that made the game possible were running, and the story behind its creation. You'll thank me later. Or you won't, cause it's the internet and everyone seems to be doing whatever they feel like doing. Fire King is probably least known and most deserving to be known arcade game out of this whole video. It's a follow-up, a superior successor to Demonskis we spoke about in one of the previous videos. It's essentially a Gauntlet clone but on steroids. It's also more leaning towards the action RPG form of gameplay than straight up plain top-down corridor shooter original was. There are 6 different characters to choose from and each specializes in one of the 3 disciplines of strength, magic or armor. You and a buddy of yours will traverse various different areas in time, from plain landscapes through towers and dungeons to even rivers. The areas are bigger than before, filled with various unique bodies, some of which are especially deadly like black slime, and there are numerous different items and spells that can be found to help you on your way. There are also traps and puzzles all throughout it to spice up the gameplay. Story-wise, the city of Stormhaven Bay, that was protected by 4 mages each responsible for a different element, fire, earth, water and wind, has had its fire mage killed, lost its defenses, and now the monsters roam the land and attack the townspeople. You set off to defeat the monsters and restore the peace to the kingdom. Fire King is fast, action-packed and amazing. Probably the best Gauntlet-like game. Better than original if you have someone to play it with, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. Conceptually, Firepower seems like a game that should work. It's a tank game where one tank faces off another and it's best played in 2-player versus mode, as otherwise it's just meh. But why? Why isn't it as fun as we'd hope a tank game to be? Well, I have someone here that would like to chime in. Go on, Bruce.
I'm Batman.
Wow, thank you, Bruce. Your insights are, well, yeah. Anyway, let me try to explain. The graphics are not great but good enough, the sounds are there but don't make especially great impression, and gameplay, well, gameplay is there if you have a friend with you. Then each of you tries to capture the flag from another's base and bring it back to yours, all the while fighting off turrets and helicopters alike. It can actually be fun for a little while played like that. In single player, the game is disappointingly boring and there's no added multiplayer fun to cover up bad scrolling. All in all, try it out with a friend and skip it if you're alone. Firestrike is a C64 exclusive and a flight combat arcade shooter. Basically an afterburner we deserved but never got on Commodore's little machine that could. You're Tom Cruise in Top Gun. First or second, irrelevant, you're him. And you fly F-16 completing 8 different scenarios, from these in Middle East to those in Russia. Objectives don't vary that much however, and you basically have to kill all enemies that pop up to progress to the next mission. You refuel and pick armament before each one, and you have to pick well, as not all weapons are as effective against certain enemies as others are. What's worth pointing out are the excellent graphics with their full 3D effect, and sense of speed when fighting in the skies. Firestrike is super fun, and if you felt slightly disappointed with C64's port of Afterburner, it's definitely the right choice to fill in for that title. Forgotten Worlds originated in the arcades and is a horizontally scrolling shooter for up to 2 players. You control one of 2 dudes flying with a jetpack and shooting any manner of monstrosities, machines and random things to progress within the game and defend the planet known as Dust World. That apparently, according to the game's story, used to be Earth, our Earth. Your main task is to get to the so-called BIOS, an evil and twisted being that's responsible for the planet's poor state. Some enemies drop coins that when collected can be used in between the levels in shop to purchase upgrades. As you might have noticed by now, the game is beautiful. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's arcade perfect, cause it's nowhere near that, but it's definitely one of the better looking titles of 1989. Sprites are big and smoothly animated, backgrounds are detailed and thematically correct, and overall the game feels when looking at it like a near masterpiece. Sadly, same cannot cannot be said about the controls and difficulty. First is odd, clunky and requires getting used to. I mean, when you eventually grasp them to the point that you'd feel comfortable, the game will gain a new life for you, as it will stop feeling that you keep dying not out of your own fault. And that's where we get into the second issue, difficulty. Forgotten Worlds on C64 is unforgiving. It drops enemies on you from both sides, often quite a few of these at once, and at times it just feels impossible to get through them without dying. And it is the case, I'm afraid. It's also why the game is best played with a friend in simultaneous multiplayer where you can both watch each other's backs. Let me start by saying that GDragons Domain, aka Deathbringer, has an epic title screen. It looks like a fantasy book cover or a VHS title inlet straight from the 80s, which makes sense given when the game was released and what it is. Story-wise, the land of Mezron has befallen to an evil wizard Azazel, which coincidentally sounds like a name of one of the fallen angels, I think. I'm not sure, I'm not religious, but I believe I've seen it in a movie or something. And said wizard is searching for 5 gems that will grant him unlimited and ultimate power, not unlike Thanos was. It's easy to guess who has to stop him, right? GDragons Domain is a first-person real-time role-playing with an epic story and uninspired combat. There's no animations of enemies attacking, so you only really can tell that they are by your HP bar going down. It's perhaps not something to detract you from playing, but definitely a little annoyance at least to me. Graphics are really nice, but sounds are your typical clanks and whooshes and nothing special, just adequate. But given the interesting plot, and especially if you're a fan of a genre, you should enjoy GDragons Domain. Gemini Wing is a port from the arcades and a vertically scrolling shoot-em-up. As in most games in a genre, aliens have invaded Earth, and given that Batman hanged down his cape, you are the one to face them. And since you have no access to as sophisticated tech as he did, you're gonna face him in an old-timey propeller plane. What? It's a bit late now, isn't it? I'm sure if he knew he would... Oh, whatever man, you're not helpful at all. Better focus on those nachos, they're not gonna eat themselves. It's a bit late now, but Batman's saying that he would have lent you his Batplane if you'd asked before. He's having lunch now, so... Anyway, let's leave him in a sea of guac and salsa and get back to our game. Graphically, Gemini Wing is really nice. It features a lot of sprites on screen at once and richly detailed backgrounds, which would be fine if they all wouldn't crash together. So it's often difficult to distinguish background objects from enemy shots, and the screen has a tendency to flicker when there's too many sprites displayed at once. Not to mention the flashing that seems to be used often and for no reason really. Unless it's there to upset those who are sensitive to that. Then they've hit the jackpot. Other than that, if you get used to the aforementioned annoyances, it's actually a pretty fun and well-playing game, even if a tad too demanding for my liking. Ghouls 'n Ghosts is a follow-up to earlier Ghosts 'n Goblins, also action platformer that originated in the arcades and a much better game than the first one was. For one, it actually contains all 5 stages that the arcade has, and all features from it too. Nearly nothing important was cut to save space or reduce the loading. If you wonder what I mean by that, watch the series episode for 1986. Then there's the enemy behavioral patterns and gameplay mechanics. All are moved to Commodore's system perfectly, within its power limitations that is. Graphics are pretty decent too, and quite arcade faithful, with some small but notable omissions in some backgrounds and the main characters. Arthur's beard, or lack thereof. These are small sacrifices that do not impede the gameplay though, some only pointing them out for the sake of transparency. What is a serious downgrade from the arcade though is the inability of Arthur to turn while crouching, which may not sound like much when I say it, but it can actually cause you to die from time to time. And these deaths feel cheap, as they're not caused by your own faults. This is going to be a tough one to explain. Which is odd, because the game is actually pretty simple. There's a story to Grand Monster Slam, something about conflict between different races that led to numerous wars and battles, and since these were largely unresolved and carried on for years stupidly, when in time peace was finally achieved, all races decided to meet every year to celebrate it via a sports game resembling the pointless and victorious wars of yesteryears. The so-called Grand Monster Slam was born. It is composed out of 3 major parts: the main game, Revenge of the Belloms, Fulton Feeding, and penalty kicks, if necessary. These do not always happen though. In the main game you're pitted against another player from opposing team and you're both throwing belloms at each other. Belloms are small round furry creatures kinda resembling magways before they turn into gremlins. The goal is to throw them so fast and well that all would end up on opponent's side, preferably by hitting him too, as each hit leaves him immobile for a few seconds. There are a couple of kinds of shots and even a provoking one, and they will take a moment getting used to, but the rules themselves are hella easy to grasp when actually playing. Then there's the Revenge of the Belloms, where you stand in the middle of the square area with a pole with shields on opposing two sides and have to repel Bellum attacks for points. And finally, Photon feeding sees 6 Photon sitting on differently high poles and you have to throw Bellums at them to feed them. I know, Photon is another stupid name you've never heard of and probably never will again, but if you wonder, they're green orc-like creatures with unusually high head-to-torso ratio. Penalties only happen if your opponent shot the Bellum into the audience during the main game, and penalty taker decides where to throw Bellum while defender which side to defend. If unsuccessful in defense, 3 Bellums are added to the defender's side. And I realize, guys, that all that sounds beyond stupid, and there are a lot of names that have no meaning to you as they do not have any to me either. But it is what it is, and sounds way more complicated than it actually is when playing. So to summarize and simplify, Grand Monster Slam is a sports game that requires either learning the tropes of, or a single video worth watch of time to learn the rules by watching playthrough on YouTube. Grand Prix Circuit is probably the best Formula 1 racing game on C64, probably because Microprose games are really good too, and it would have taken a while of playtesting to pick D1. One way or another, it's an excellent simulator that, while only featuring 3 teams and 8 circuits, offers unprecedented, at least for C64, feeling of being there at the machine's steering wheel racing at incredible speeds. Especially that each of the cars actually feels different, and you have to do what real-life drivers do, so slow down considerably while turning. There's no high-speed corners taking in Grand Prix Circuit. I'm sure that by this point in this short preview I don't have to tell you that the graphics are fantastic. The screen is divided in 2 horizontally, most likely to reduce the power requirement on track rendering, but don't quote me on that. The bottom part with the steering wheel, speed dial and working rearview mirrors looks as good as it can on C64. The top, showing the track and other drivers, is also great. All in all, whatever you wanna talk about when it comes to Grand Prix Circuit, it's phenomenal and all fans of racing games should definitely check it out. If Hard and Heavy seems eerily familiar to you but you can't tell why, you're right, you've seen it before. Well, not it, but the engine and same style of graphics by the same artist. It was also platformer and horizontally scrolling from left to right, also featured a timer, power-ups and collectibles, and also allowed for 2 players to play alternating. There's a lot of alsos in that sentence. I believe grammar gods are furious now. Unless Batman will fix it in post and cut it to sound better, but given how quote-unquote hard he's been working, I seriously doubt that. Anyway, where you've seen it all was in a little game better known as The Great Gianna Sisters. Chris Halsbeck composed music for both and Manfred Trenz did the graphics. So 2 legends work once again on the same game together. And you know what? It shows, cause not only it sounds and looks great, but plays amazing too. There's some kind of story about 2 robots sent on Mars to search for new sources of lithium for batteries, but it's dull and I'm not even gonna get into it here. Same as in Gianna, you get extra lives for collectible diamonds, there are also upgrades to weapons and overall the game feels very similar. The game modes are entirely different and interesting though, cause other than the standard single and alternating multiplayer, there's also 2 simultaneous 2-player modes, where both players control the same character. In first, control changes between them upon either death or completed level, in the other every 10 seconds. If you like Gianna Sisters or enjoy platformers as a genre in general, there were hardly many better by 1989. Hostages, aka Hostage Rescue Mission, which is more appropriate title given what you do in the game, is a real-time stealth action shooter mix, and I have mixed feelings about it. Because on one hand, it's a precursor to modern games like Rainbow Six, while on the other all missions are virtually identical and only really vary in difficulty level. What? I see. But it's not the same. Dude, no. Oh, whatever, man. Yeah, I'll tell him if it's so important to you. So, Batman's asking me to tell you that his crime fighting was in majority of cases also very repeatable and samey, and most of the time felt as if he was doing the same thing just a bit more difficult each next time. I'm not sure if that's the case given how many different villains he fought, but whatever. What I do know for sure is that he does keep getting new achievements, life achievements, mainly based on how much fast food a single person can ingest in one sitting. And it's staggering. You could feed a small army unit for a week with what this man goes through during his lunch here. Apparently it's something about building mass, whatever that means. Anyway, in Hostages you control a unit of 6 elite Spec Ops professionals trying to free hostages from the embassy. At the beginning of a mission you need to place 3 snipers in strategic positions to provide backup. The remaining 3 you need to stealth guide into the building, preferably if possible unnoticed. When that's done, you either have to free and securely evacuate all the hostages from the building or eliminate all terrorists. If any of the hostages are wounded or your soldier is killed, mission is considered a failure. Hostages is definitely quite a unique and original title, and if you enjoy those, there's a lot to like here. But replayability is questionable, so it's worth keeping that in mind if you plan on investing in original Discord tape. Insects in Space is a horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up. insects have attacked the Earth and eradicated all humans apart from babies. Now, why the babies were left unharmed, no one knows. But what is well-known fact is that they cannot be left unsupervised around alien insects, as it will not end up good. So, the mythical Saint Helen travels to Earth to save the babies. Interestingly enough, in manual she's mentioned as big-breasted. I don't know why this was important, perhaps to increase the sales based on the game cover only. Our protagonist can move both ways, similar to Defender, and the game itself plays kinda like it too. All the levels are 2 screen high, with one featuring the floor and the other the ceiling, as if you were flying our booby heroine through caverns or tunnels or such. You have to steer Saint Helen to pick up babies positioned either at the very top or very bottom, and in the same time shoot the enemy beast trying to kidnap the kids. Babies can either be returned to the ground for points, or you can hold on to them to convert them into power-ups eventually. As saints go, Helen has a special power of her own. She can summon a dust cloud that will teleport her to the near bee target. I know that all that talk about bees and babies may suggest something else, but Insects in Space is actually one of the best Defender-like games on C64. ISS Incredible Shrinking Sphere is a game you don't expect to like, judging by the cover. Looking at the graphics when you run it, at the first glance it looks like a Spin Dizzy or Marble Madness clone, and you expect a subpar cheap copy that will get bored within time it takes you to brew a pot of tea. Brew a pot of tea. Oh my days, I'm old. Okay, let me rephrase it. Blah blah blah, blah blah blah, blah blah blah, and you expect a subpar product that you'll get bored with in time it takes you to prepare a drink. So pick a glass, drop couple of ice cubes, pour fire water in, and inhale the aroma. I think that sounds better. Anyway, whatever it may appear to be just by looking at it, it's not. ISS is surprisingly fun and addictive, and if you give it a minute, you may actually find yourself spending hours playing it. The idea here is simple and similar to the aforementioned games, to guide the ball from start to finish of each level through 4 linked sections. But there are a lot of different hazards on your way, like enemies, special tiles that will shoot your ball in random direction, or even dark cavities, falling through which always ends up with death. You are not left to wander this hazardous world defenseless. There are various upgrades in game too, like weapons or shields, and positive special tiles like ramps that will propel you in a direction at much faster pace, to name a few. ISS is fun. It's definitely not one of the best games on C64, but it's one of the good ones, and definitely worth a playthrough even if you think that you may not enjoy. 2 Jaws games released in 1989 on C64. One was an average at best game, the other was pretty bad. This one's the average one, made by Stars of Development Laboratories. Neither of them had much to do with the movie other than the title and that they wrote on its popularity. This Jaws is an arcade mix in which you play as a fishing ship captain hunting down sharks for the Jaws. Before you set off hunting though, you have to equip your boat with fuel, food, weapons, ammo and hire crew. Sharks are hunted either via harpoon gun, rifle or while scuba diving, and you can sell the remains in general shop for money that can then be used to purchase boat upgrades. Well, that's pretty much it, and you can't really expect much more novelty in Jaws. It's a pretty enjoyable, even if not long-lasting experience that's worth a look if you like those arcade management games that are just okay. If you look for something bigger, deeper or better, look somewhere else. Kandle Warrior is a side-view action-adventure by the same people that gave us Demonskis that we spoke about in the last video. And you can tell. The character movements, the detailed graphics on both sprites and backgrounds, and everything just screams Demonskis. Well, everything but the setting. While that game was fantasy-themed, this one's placing its cards on the Orient. So you're not a shirtless barbarian like huge sword-wielding bodybuilder wannabe, but a martial artist with appropriately small but nimble hitting sword. Starwards, you're on a mission to retrieve the secret documents which have been stolen. So, you're traversing through a huge complex fighting various enemies and guard dogs, and solving some very basic environmental puzzles, like picking up correct shields and using them to pass the same colored beam barriers. You will also find other helpful items on your way, wire cutters and pipe wrench to be exact. And they both have their appropriate usage scenarios. Kandle Warrior is fun, and a really high quality release even though it was originally a budget title. It's an excellent example of an action-adventure game made for C64 that could easily compete with 8-bit console releases of the time. If there's one thing KGB and now FSB are well known for, are the spies. And I'm not only saying it because I'm fearful for my life, but also because historically speaking, that is, or at the very least was the case. Now, KGB Super Spy is a two-way horizontally scrolling shooter that, other than the title, has nothing to do with all I just said. The game takes place a little after Second World War, when Germany is divided into East and West. A group of scientists want to deflect to the west side while being kept in the east against their will and used to help in creation of some kind of a new deadly weapon. You, as an excellent pilot that you are, and don't be modest, I've seen you doing both saving the world and managing to control all manner of regular and interstellar vehicles. With ease, I must add. So yeah, you will be saving them and dropping at the safe house, 6 per each of the first 4 levels. In 5th, you'll have to deliver all those previously rescued scientists to West Germany. Sounds simple, right? Pick them up, keep them safe, and then move them to freedom. It's anything but though. You're constantly attacked by both ground and air enemies, mechanized and infantry, and there's so many of them that without the use of cheats, the game can actually get pretty challenging. Oh, and if that's not enough, there are also imposters pretending to be the scientists who are out to get you. You can recognize them by the hand that they wave at you with. I realize that it all may seem like a lot, like a challenge, but I would like to remind you once more that I've seen you in action before. So don't complain, fire your C64 up and get to work. Those eggheads ain't gonna save themselves. Right, Bruce? I'm Batman. See, even he agrees. Kings of the Beach is probably the very best C64 volleyball game. It follows classic Beach 2 and 2 volleyball rules and it's fantastic. It also features simultaneous cooperative and competitive play, and sort of campaign mode where you have to beat 20 challengers in 15 levels in all sorts of iconic locations in Rio, Hawaii and Sydney to name a few, all to become the titular King of the Beach. As much as I don't care much for sports or most sports games, Kings of the Beach is actually really fun and I enjoy a match or two once in a while if there's someone willing to play, that is. Especially that the graphics are really nice and it's not always given on C64. If there's one thing I could really complain about, it's the controls. One fire button is just not enough, especially if you had a chance to play Kings of the Beach on PC or NES. C64's one button controls feel very unsatisfying. Other than that, it's a lot of fun. Knights of Legend is a fantasy turn-based role-playing. It takes place in a land of Ashal-Terea, where the villain of the game Pildar captured the Duke, ruler of the land, and the famous warrior Segalion, all in a one-sweep kidnapping. You lead your party of adventurers to defeat the Pildar and rescue said captives. The game is viewed from a top-down perspective and combat takes place on a separate strategic screens. Interestingly enough, unlike many other games at the time, Knights of Legend allowed for targeting of individual body parts during combat, with all the expected effects if such attack was successful. Before you started the game, however, you had to create your party of 6 adventurers, picking between 4 races of humans, elves, dwarves and so-called Keldar. The last race could actually fly, so that's worth pointing out as not often you got that kind of skill in RPGs in the 80s. And there were also dozens of classes to choose from. It is truly a remarkable game that sadly was dead on arrival. Well, dead soon after arrival, as it was built as a full-fledged game but on a modular engine that allowed for plugging in of additional scenarios, locations and quests, and 5 of those add-ons were planned to drop soon after the game released. They never did, however, and the fact that the game seemed to be loading new data from the disk all the freaking time made it nigh unplayable for those who lacked patience. Funny enough, it's only marginally better on emulation. If you have someone who doesn't mind the wait, as long as you get to experience something special, Knights of Legend could easily be described as one of the best RPGs of 1989. Laser Squad originally released in 1988 on ZX Spectrum and then moved to C64 in 1989. It's a turn-based tactics game designed by Julian Golob, who may you know as one of 2 Golob brothers and a design mastermind responsible for later UFO Enemy Unknown. Coming back to Laser Squad though, it's a game of 5 unique missions, 7 if you count the released later expansion pack. Each of those missions is different in its theme, but mechanically works the same. All units in your squad have a set number of action points and use them to move, perform various actions and shoot. What's most notable about Laser Squad though is that it introduced a simple morale system. So if one of the units kept missing shots, getting wounded or witnesses a teammate's death, he can become shaken and panic. While panicking, he will run out of your control, often possibly straight into his death as an easy target for the enemies. Laser Squad was a cornerstone on which most other notable future turn-based tactic games were based, and as a first so advanced game in the genre, despite a very limited competition on the gaming market when it released, it was an amazing tactical gem. The last fight looks fantastic on the screenshots. Actually, it looks fantastic in person as well. Kinda like international karate with a bit smaller sprites. Backgrounds, however, are phenomenal and I really like the minuscule details in them, color work with C64's limited palette and faux 3D in the arenas themselves. All of it looks great. Sounds are okay and the music tune playing in the background is quite good as well. So, everything's fine, right? Not really. While the presentation is stellar, the gameplay is lacking. The animations are choppy, the controls are odd, available moves are unimpressive and the character sprites leave a lot to be desired when in movement. It's a bad international karate clone with surprisingly high quality presentation. And yes, it's karate not karate. Let's Storm is a port from the arcades and it's a sci-fi top-down racer. It's very fast and features parallax scrolling second bottom layer, adding not only to that perception of fast movement but also to feeling of death. as if you're racing on tracks hanged way above the city skylines. The racing itself is quite fun, though at times it feels like the objects cluttering the road are left there just for your benefit, or to inhibit it really. If that wasn't enough, most of vehicles you'll pass move around the motorway as if their drivers were at least half of the run battle in, and in the process of downing the other half. These are however very minor nuisances and just a part of track design, so don't take my complaints as if there was something wrong with the game. It's me who's finding issues where there's none. Something that my current assistant actually taught me. He pointed out that I should not throw away food that's just a few days out of date, as he's more than happy to eat it. I mean, you would have thought that Batman's one of the most well-off folks out there, but he seems to be caring about such seemingly unimportant things. Unless that's precisely how you become rich, and I've been doing something wrong all along the way. Still, Let's Storm is a fun game, especially if you like unusual racers. License to Kill is an action game based on the 1989 movie of the same title starring Timothy Dalton. It loosely follows the plot of the movie by recreating iconic scenes from it. All of them are viewed from a top-down vertically scrolling perspective, so you'll be traversing upwards while shooting enemies and avoiding their fire, either on foot or using various different and assigned to specific levels vehicles. If memory serves, at some point you're even going to be landing a plane on a moving track, and then driving that track. The graphics and sounds are pretty good too, though not on the level of Commodore's finest, and the gameplay overall is decent too. While License to Kill is not a groundbreaking title, but just your average shooter with some interesting ideas here and there, it's pretty fun and a definite treat to James Bond's fans. Mayday Squad's story is as flat and an obvious medium for explosive action as stories in most 80s action movies were. It's there just to justify all the shooting only, but don't take it as a game's weak point. I don't expect my shooters to captivate me with a beautiful setting, touching plot and mind-boggling twists. I want the story to be there and fit thematically to what I'm doing on the screen. That's it. The fictional countries of Lutonia's embassy has been raided by terrorists and they've locked themselves inside with the ambassador's daughter taken as hostage. Batman's having a bubble bath now, or as he likes to call it, bubble bath, so he can't help. But you, my dear viewer, a seasoned warrior for what's good and right, can. So you assemble a team of 3 Special Forces soldiers, a leader responsible for marksmanship, demolition guy armed to the teeth with grenades, and communication specialist who, for whatever the reason, is also well versed in opening all kinds of locks. And you set off to rid the damsel in distress of the reason for said distress, and in the process save her from the terrorists' grasp. The game is played in a third-person perspective from behind the back of your 3 brave soldiers, and you always lead one while the other 2 are CPU controlled. You can, however, switch between them at any moment to use their unique skills and abilities. Most of the game is traversing the embassy, searching for clues where the hostage girl is kept, and fighting enemy opposition. Mayday Squad could have been a great game with the mechanics it's based on, but something happened along the way. I don't know what, perhaps the devs ran out of time or money, and the game ended up just good. Which, you know, is not bad at all, but could have been even better. Mean Streets is a sci-fi futuristic adventure game taking place at US West Coast in the year 2033 and a first title in Tex Murphy detective adventure series. You're tasked with investigating the murder of a university professor who turns out to be one of 8 scientists involved in cryptically named Project Overlord, a plan to remotely control people. Quite quickly you'll learn about the seriousness of the situation, that the investigation is not as simple and straightforward as it might have seemed initially. Commodore's port of Mean Streets is sort of a miracle, as that kind of a game with digitized graphics had no reason to work on an 8-bit system really. At least not as well as it does. Sure, loading times are a nightmare and every time you die or get caught by cops you have to reboot the game, which is hella annoying I must add, but other than that it's a perfect port. At least in as much of a way as is possible on a such low power system. If you like sci-fi mystery / detective adventure games, there's hardly any better 8-bit games available. MiG-29 Soviet fighter in the 80s was Russia's, or should I say USSR's, most modern fighter. It is also a title of 1989's budget-released C64 video game. It's an arcade action shooter viewed from behind the plane, a much better clone of Afterburner than the original ports to C64 were, and well worth its asking price of close to nothing. It was literally so cheap that you could get like 10 of these for a price of a standard non-budget release. And if I'm to be honest, while definitely not being the best shooter on the system, it was better than many of the so-called AAA games. There are many different types of enemies, planes, tanks and various installations, and few kinds of weapons you can use against them, namely air-to-air missiles, standard and nuclear bombs. And there's even an occasional boss once in a while. For the laughingly low price MiG-29 was sold for, it was a game and a half, and well worth the time it took to complete it. I mean, if memory serves, you could buy it for a screw, couple of matches and an old shoelace. That's how cheap it was. Might and Magic 2 Gates to Another World is a second installment in Might and Magic series of games and the direct sequel to the previous title. Same as in predecessor, you start by creating a party of 6 characters in one of 8 available classes: Knight, Paladin, Archer, Cleric, Sorcerer, Robber, Ninja or Barbarian, and in one of 5 races, picking between humans, elves, dwarves, gnomes and half-orcs. There are many locations and items in-game that are restricted to certain genders, alignments or races, so it's worth to keep that in mind. You can also hire up to 2 additional characters mid-game for a total of 8 in your party. Might and Magic 2 is bigger and much better game than the first was, not only offering a completely revamped skill system, but it's also more quest-oriented, with these given by various characters in many of the in-game towns and some of them only completable at specific times of the day for added immersion. But its most novel and unheard of at the time feature, at least in my mind, is the characters aging, where they can actually die of an old age if you spend too much time waiting. Might and Magic 2 was a great beginning, even if not technically the first title of an amazing series that spanned over many games and generations of gaming hardware. Also known as Pipe Dream and having ports to most older systems, Pipe Mania is a very well-known puzzler classic. Even if the title does not ring the bell, I'm pretty sure that at the very least you've seen the glimpse of gameplay somewhere. The goal of each of the 36 levels is to build a long enough pipeline for the liquid to flow until that aforementioned length is reached. And since pipes have different kinds of connections and show up randomly, and the liquid keeps flowing, Pipe Mania requires quick thinking and planning and will keep you on your toes all the way through. It's a fun but really tough game that only suffers, at least in my opinion, from a bit too steep difficulty curve. Rick Dangerous is a game that uses oldest trick in a book for prolonging its stay. It's extremely punishing difficulty level. That's Dark Souls-like for no other reason than to keep the player at the screen longer than necessary. But unfortunately, it's not done with use of engaging in interesting puzzles or skill-based gameplay mechanics. Nope, it's all achieved with memorization and infinite trial and error. So you play, you die, you memorize why, you play again, pass that point this time, die 3 seconds later, memorize that, repeat from the start passing those 2 obstacles, just to die once more a little while later, and then restart again, and so on and so on and so on. While I'm dumping on Rick here with the strength of a gigantic shit waterfall, don't get me wrong, I don't dislike it at all. I love it in fact. It offers interesting level design and setting reminiscent of old Indiana Jones movies, and it's atmospheric and really fun to conquer once or twice, preferably with a friend swapping joysticks when it gets too annoying for either of you. And despite me hating pointless repetition and memorization mechanics in games, conquering some of the more sneaky drops and finally beating a level in Rick Dangerous feels incredibly rewarding. Monte Carlo Casino is my most favorite casino game to this day, even if only cause I don't really play casino games anymore. It still is. In short, it's a single-player casino game where you start with just $10,000 and a dream to make it big and win a lot. It features 5 games of roulette, blackjack, 5-card draw poker, craps and jackpot slots. Being released by Codemasters, I expected it to be a budget release, but it feels anything but budget. Graphics, while in most screens static, are very nice and always show all the players at the table you're at. Aside from jackpot slots, that is. Fun enough, it is always the same bunch of folks, so clearly they are either working casino or you for the money. I used to play Monte Carlo Casino with 2 cousins of mine back in the day, alternating in place trying to see who could make more in roulette and both card games. Craps and jackpot slots we played the least. Perhaps Monte Carlo Casino is a simple game with very basic easy-to-code mechanics, but it's hella fun and the title screen tune is forever engraved in my psyche as one of the few 8-bit chiptunes I will never forget. If you like casino games or just wanna chill out for a little while between more action-packed titles, there's hardly anything better on C64. Mr. Heli, originally known in the arcades as Battle Chopper, is a horizontally scrolling shoot-em-up and a great example how arcade conversions should be made. And I'm not only saying it because it's excellent, but also because its 16-bit computer counterparts of the time, so Amiga and Atari ST, were trash. As in case of most games that originated from cigarette smoke-filled arcades, plot in Mr. Heli is very basic and there just to serve as a reason for all the destruction that you'll be causing. To summarize it, an evil villain named only as Mr. Muddy is threatening the planet and you, being the universal badass that you are, take upon yourself to save us again. This time, flying armed to the teeth Battle Chopper. Mr. Heli's graphics are incredible, sounds and music are pretty good too, and it plays like a freaking charm, even if it's a bit difficult. But, and that's kinda important here, while being challenging, it's not frustrating. It sits somewhere in the border between the two, in a perfect spot to be enjoyed by all fans of the genre. Brace yourselves, cause this one's going to be straight for the reddit.com/r/unpopular opinion, cause I think that myth history in the making on C64 is very similar to first Shadow of the Beast on the Amiga. So an action platformer with incredible groundbreaking for the system presentation, and that's pretty much it. A show-off of system's hidden power and capabilities that only great coders that really mastered the machine could bring into life. Oh, and you gotta see the game's cover and compare it to the gameplay that's on the screen now. Let me show you. While both are great, they don't have anything to do with each other. An early example of buy bait, I think. That said, to be completely transparent with you, different releases had different covers, so there was also one that kinda fits the gameplay. Check it out. Anyway, coming back to our game at hand, in C64 version you play as a teenage boy that fell through a tear in space-time continuum and ended up in so-called Time of Legends. Then he is rescued by High Priestess, who informs him that their world is under attack from the Dark Angel, who must be stopped. And if he succeeds, he'll be able to come back home. And since you're a stand-up guy that you are, and don't have much other choice than to control the brat, you will help the priestess to save her world. Map features many different kinds of regular enemies, special bosses, environmental puzzling, and a whole slew of various weapons to find and use against the baddies. It's a decent but not great game that, similarly to earlier mentioned Shadow of the Beast, gained popularity because of its visuals, which are stunning, no doubt about that, but the gameplay loop itself is just good at best. On one hand, I couldn't wait till we get to the New Zealand story. On the other, I dreaded that we eventually will, because I remember it as this awesome arcade conversion that I could play at home and have a lot of fun with beautiful graphics, memorable tune, and all the addictive gameplay that the arcade cabinet offered. But I'm no fool. Am I, Bruce? I'm Batman. Thanks, buddy. I can always count on you. So, I'm no fool, at least not big enough to think that what I remember about the 30-year-old game is all sunshine and rainbows as I recall it. And it's not. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The New Zealand story is an action platformer ported from the arcades to our little C64. That places you in shoes of a chicken named Tiki, literal shoes I might add, that has to save all her tribe members who were kidnapped and caged by the evil leopard seal. So you'll embark on an epic quest through all of New Zealand, visiting places like Auckland, Waitamo Caves and Mount Cook. Each level is unforgivingly timed, and you have to crossbow your way through what seems like hundreds of respawnable enemies to get to the caged chicken and save them. As you go about it, you'll be able to collect upgrades like extra lives, laser shots, bombs and even fireballs. The original concept, while difficult, was very addictive, and C64's version is no different, but even more difficult because of weird at times collision boxes, a bit unpredictable controls and badly chosen background colors for some stages, so that they clash with the enemies. All that makes this already difficult game even harder on C64. Does it make it a bad game though? Nope, not in the slightest, just one that will require a very specific player, one that today would enjoy all those Souls-like games. Night Dawn is a top-down arcade shooter. The goal of each level is very simple: to guide your tank from start to exit, defeating enemies and turrets along the way, all the while avoiding mines and solving very basic environmental puzzles like finding appropriate keys for the doors and switches for energy barriers. And this is pretty much where I could end this preview, as that's the gist of it. But there's little more. Not much more, but enough to cover another 30 seconds of gameplay footage or so. So, initially your tank has no weapon, so you have to find a cannon and preferably other useful upgrades like a mine detector, extra energy or a radar, just to gear up for the challenge. Night Dawn's graphics are not great, especially given what was possible on C64 by 1989, and same could be said about sound design. It's there, but it's not gonna raise the roof or turn any heads. Just your typical beeps and bops. And gameplay, while fun for a little while, is also a victim to a bit spongy controls and questionable collision detection. So, approach it only if the video in the background looks interesting to you, otherwise you can focus on our next game. A Nightmare on Elm Street is an action-adventure game based on a movie of the same name. The aim of the title is to free your friends from the grasp of Freddy Krueger, and to do so you pick one of 5 available characters, each having different starting item, abilities and appearance. The game is divided into 2 parts, first being a top-down view of the city where you have to locate Freddy's house while avoiding his attacks. And I'm gonna help you here, cause while the house is random, it's usually the one with trees next to it and blinking lights in the windows. And second part is inside of said house, which you have to explore to save souls of your friends. You do so by using appropriate objects where necessary. A Nightmare on Elm Street is a fun little game which sadly in my opinion holds very little replayability, but was quite popular back in the day. It's worth noting that Commodore's version plays no music in the background, which is rather disappointing for all fans of SID chip. While it's clear from the get-go that Ninja Commando is a budget title with its very basic loop and repeatable gameplay, for the price it was sold for, it's a pretty good game. I mean, you can't even get a cup of coffee for what it cost back then. In short, you're in control of a small ninja character and have to guide him to safety through a series of side-scrolling levels. These, however, are filled with enemy ninjas, pits, various obstacles and many different kinds of creatures like golems, worms and birds. And yes, all of these are deadly and out to get you. Initially you start with no weapon and can only defeat enemy ninjas by jumping on them, but as you progress you'll unlock various useful weapons like shurikens, bombs, flamethrower and a rifle. Ninja Commando is not great, but it's definitely not bad one either, and a good arcade ROM if you just wanna run around killing stuff to relax. I just heard myself saying that. So not to make YouTube gods angry, let me make that clear. I meant running around killing stuff in game only. Forgive me, oh great YouTube overlords, for I have misspoken. The Ninja Warriors is a side-scrolling beat-em-up that was converted from the arcades. Out there it was simultaneous two-player game, usually built out of 2 free horizontally placed screens. And that is also why Commodore's version is in a widescreen letterbox mode to accommodate the gameplay of original to C64's capabilities. The gameplay is not very original, all you really do is walk right, kill enemies, rinse and repeat, and nothing more really. There's no varied moves or specials, just your ninja and his shurikens and knives. All that said, the game actually plays really well, it's fun and does not get old as fast as it really should given its repeatable format, which is nice. The graphics and sound design are really good, and if you're a fan of a genre, it's a worthy title to add to your collection, as despite not offering a 2-player mode, it's quite fun played alternating, swapping joystick between the 2 or even 3 players, completing the levels. As far as I know, No Mercy was never released commercially outside of Germany, so overall you could consider it a really obscure title anywhere else. And as such, it's fantastic. I mean, definitely not the best shooter on C64, but easily one of the better ones. It's Operation Wolf clone that somehow feels and plays better than the original does. Same as Wolf, it's played from first-person perspective and you control a crosshair shooting at enemy soldiers and vehicles. There's quite a few of these to fight against too, ranging from infantry and tanks through helicopters to gunships, with many more introduced in decent selection of 7 available stages. So you won't get bored playing No Mercy. Just make sure to show none to your opponents. Mercy, that is. All levels are horizontally scrolling right, apart from the last that is static. While ammo is finite, you can collect replenishments for it, and both special rockets and health pickups too. You can only carry up to 3 rockets and they're launched with a spacebar, so back in the day either your friend launched them or you've done it with your own foot. If you enjoy demanding but not unfair classic shooters, there weren't many better released in 1989 on C64. Oil Imperium, aka Black Gold, as the title may give away, is a business management game in which you're an oil magnate. Or oil magnate wannabe to be precise. And while it offers pretty solid economic model and it's decently realistic, its best quality without a shred of a doubt is a fun factor. It's just plain and simple fun. And while obviously you'll be purchasing oil fields, surveying for oil and finally drilling for it, you will also try to sabotage your opponent's fields, aim to fulfill the timed contracts, lay pipelines and extinguish oil fields' fires, and all that gets even better when played in multiplayer, which the game supports up to 4 of you competing on a single system. Black Gold is a German game, and although it's been mentioned in Amiga and those 10 Years of Gaming series, it's worth mentioning here too. I firmly believe that in the late 80s and early 90s, German developers made the best management and business simulation games, a lot better than anyone else did. And no, I'm not German. Phobia is a horizontally scrolling shoot-em-up and a pretty damn good one at that. The game consists of 15 levels, or planets as its story says, that are themed around things humans fear, some of our phobias if you will, so spiders, snakes and even dentists to name a few. And you must complete these fear-inducing stages to rescue the Galactic Emperor from hands of evil Phobos. Each level is composed out of 3 sections, first where you fly towards the planet, second where you fly around it, and finally third where you navigate the cavern systems within the planet. The graphics are fantastic and I swear that they get better with each level. And sound is pretty spot on too. There's no in-game music however, but given how great everything else is, it's not something that should deter you from playing. Phobia is one of the best shoot-em-ups on C64, and if you're a fan of a genre and never played it, it's the title you should try out from this video first. Since we've done with the good, let's cover the bad. But that's just a conditional bad really, meaning that you have to fulfill a certain requirement for it to be a bad for you. What I mean by that is that Phobia is Dark Souls of early shoot-em-ups. It's incredibly difficult, so if you like me and don't enjoy punishing games, then the difficulty level will definitely be a bad for you. Otherwise, everything with it is just stellar. Personally, I wouldn't risk saying that Pro Tennis Tour aka Great Courts is the best tennis game on C64, but even if it isn't, it's the second best at worst. And most likely the best looking one. It's slick, fast, beautifully animated and most of all immensely playable. But it's not an easy title. Oh no, for the first few or even a dozen of games if you're me, it's nigh impossible to get close to the net or even hit the ball. CPU player just seems ungodly good compared to what you can do. But that's a deception, as all Pro Tennis 2 really requires is practice. And if you do and invest some time in the game, you'll get progressively better with each game and eventually will not only learn all the tricks and plays, but will gain deeper appreciation for the title. Project Firestart is a C64 exclusive and one of the better looking and most cinematic experiences of 1989 on Commodore's little system, also one of the progenitors of a whole survival horror genre. In the not so distant future of 2066, one of our spaceship laboratories, Prometheus, was running a genetic experiment codenamed Project Firestart. It was supposed to provide us with strong, durable, genetically modified miners. Moral implications of such experiments aside, the ship has been silent for a while, not responding to any hails or attempts of contact. So you, as the universal badass and hero extraordinaire, are sent to figure out what happened. When you get there, you'll find numerous corpses in various stadiums of rotting, clearly killed by unknown creatures. So as you try to gather and put the clues together to figure out chain of events that led to the situation, you'll fight monsters and will try to rescue a singular survivor that may be the only key to the mystery. Project Firestart looks phenomenal, like an early 16-bit game and not late 8-bit one. Especially that it's a very movie-like in its design, with certain screens looking like cuts from a sci-fi horror movie. Even more so, as you go through the game, the ending, that are quite a few of, will depend not only on the outcome of the main game plot, but also on the puzzles that you did or did not solve while playing. But since I've praised the game to the moon and back, let's talk about what's not so great about it. For one, some of the enemy sprites look a little blocky and feel like they could have more frames of animation so that they would move more fluidly. And for second, the combat is clunky and difficult to get used to. Neither of these things should be a factor that stops you from playing, as even despite them, Project Firestart is fantastic. Rainbow Chaser is a random mixture of non-alcoholic sodas and juices that you down after a particularly strong shot that burns even as it's going in. Don't quote me on that, don't fact check it, just take it as it is. It is also a 1989 side-view flick-screen arcade platformer and a C64 exclusive. The evil witch has attacked the peaceful land of Eggbug, the good nameless wizard can't stop her, let's call him Bubbles, Bubbles the wizard, same as Michael Jackson's monkey, but in this particular case I'm imagining him as Bubbles from Trailer Park Boys, in his green bastard costume. So Bubbles is capable of saving the land, but requires the rainbows that are spread across the land to create the concoction that would destroy her. So to confuse you even more, you play as a literal bubble, a purple one, and have to collect the rainbows and bring them back to the wizard. But since you can only carry 20 at once, multiple trips are necessary. The witch is not defenseless, however, and she left her monster goons everywhere to stop you in your tracks. This can be either avoided by jumping over or shot with limited supply of, brace yourself, shooting stars. As you go about your heroic mission, at least for an inanimate object the bubble is, you can collect various items, some of which award extra points or stamina, others replenish your shooting stars. Rainbow Chaser was a budget title, and as such it was pretty surprising game, as its quality was far beyond what you'd expect from a game for just a couple of pounds. I really don't know what's with Commodore's developers releasing games with the same titles all the time, quite often close to each other too, but it is what it is, or rather it was what it was. So two games called Rallycross released on C64 in 1989, one by Namco, the other by Codemasters. And it's the Codemasters one that we'll cover in this video, as it's the better one. I mean, they're both similar and very simple, but this one comes out on top however you want to look at them. Rallycross is a top-down racing game for 1 or 2 players where you race around numerous different tracks for points. And if I'm to be honest, that's pretty much it. Cause after you complete them all, the game just loops back to the first and carries on from beginning. It's not a very deep experience and both graphics and gameplay are pretty bare bones, but given that Rallycross was a budget title, you couldn't expect much more of it. What is curious though is that it looks like an early test ground for later brilliant micro machines that sadly never released on C64. But don't quote me on that, it's just how I feel looking at the game and haven't researched anything about it. Do you remember the movie Tron? Well, Raster Runner takes Light Cycle's idea from the movie and builds a whole 2-player game around it. So you and an opponent, preferably another person not CPU, are riding 2 cycles, one green and one red. The rules are that simple. Each bike leaves a permanent and indestructible path behind it and you have to trap or encompass your opponent in such a way that he has no other way to go and crashes in your trail or a border wall. All that said, each of you have free uses of a special force field that allows to cross the opposing player's trail without crashing. These don't replenish however, so it's best to plan not to use them and only ever resort to when there's no other way to avoid death. Like I said, Raster Runner is as simple as they come mechanically, but in the same time it's really playable if you have someone else with you, and can be an afternoon of gaming all on its own. In my not so humble opinion, Raster Runner is the very best Tron-like game on C64. Take it as you wish, that's how I feel. I don't know if you've noticed the pattern while watching my C64 videos, but very often when games are C64 exclusives, they're pretty darn good. Not always obviously, but more often than not. Retrograde is not an exception. It's a mostly horizontally scrolling shooter in which you spend most of your time flying around killing enemies. Eventually, you'll get inside bunkers where you'll also kill enemies but moving downwards and not sideways. Overall, it's probably clear by now that it's a killing bonanza. So, killamza. And yes, there was no such word until today, but it is now. As blunt as I've made it sound saying it's all about killing, Retrograde is actually really good, fast and action-packed. The bodies are varied and there's a lot of them. They drop credits upon dev that you can later on use at shops. Bosses are big and mechanically interesting, for 1989 that is, and the game does not get old at all the way through to its very end. There's 12 different weapons that you can power up and you can even sell owned weapons with their upgrades to raise money for other better ones. It's a marvel, in both graphics and gameplay. It may not be the very best shooter on C64, but it's a pretty good one, and one of the most unique in design and gameplay. Retrograde is not very demanding as compared to other shooters, so if you're someone who easily gets tired of replaying the same stage time after time again, it shouldn't happen here. Don't take my word for it though. Try the game out and let me know if it's really as good as I'm saying. RoboCop on C64 loosely adapts Data East Arcade's game and is based on 1987's movie of the same title. It's a horizontally scrolling side-view arcade shooter in which you play as titular half-man, half-machine, and in most stages walk from left to right, shooting what feels like thousands of criminals. These stages are in most cases brought down to C64 straight from the arcade original, but not presented in correct order. Third and fourth stages are swapped to be precise. Two of these end with a boss fight against the ED-209 bipedal robot that for some weird reason can only be defeated by RoboCop's fists. The game also includes completely new stages not present in the arcade, a hostage scenario that's played from the first-person perspective, where you have to shoot a criminal holding an innocent in front of him like some kind of a disposable meat shield, and suspect sketch minigame where you have to match parts of the face correctly to the suspect within given time limit. Graphically, RoboCop is quite good, with main character's sprite presented in high resolution and displayed on nicely designed and colorful stages. All smoothly scrolling, I must add. Sounds are pretty good too, and music, while not the same as in the movie, is memorable and team accurate. But, and that's a huge but for players such as myself, RoboCop is extremely difficult and unforgiving. It's a game that plays well if you're good at it, but if you're not, then it's more annoying than anything else. So approach it only if you really feel like it's something you absolutely need to play or if you enjoy demanding titles. Rockstar Ate My Hamster is a music management game, and it's a good one, even if more on the simpler side and hidden under mounds of silly humor and cartoony graphics. You won't find any arcade skill-based motives here, but what you will is surprisingly addictive and enjoyable to experience. It's not a game that you'll play for months on end, but it's one that you'll see yourself coming back to every few months or years for a quick game or two, just for fun. You, as a manager, are tasked with picking your future band members and the instruments they'll be playing on, and then leading them into stardom. Like I said, it's a simple title at heart, so the options you'll have are not overly complicated either. You can ask your band to practice, play a gig, go on tour, organize a publicity stunt, record an album and then release it, and finally offer them gifts to keep them in line. While doing so, you'll face some random events and issues that will require your response, like deciding if they should play a charity gig or accept a sponsorship deal, among others. Rockstar Ate My Hamster is a fun title that's not too demanding and proves that management/strategy games don't have to span over weeks-long campaigns and most definitely don't need to be overly complicated, requiring 5 degrees to play and 7 to enjoy. They can be quick and easy to understand for a pleasant afternoon of gaming. Rock'n'Roll is a game that I would never appreciate back in the day, as I was always craving either something with a lot of shooting, shells flying everywhere, bullets going through dozens of enemies, and with ever-present screams of pain cutting through dense foggy air. That kind of thing. I'm a bit older now and I can appreciate a different kind of a game, especially as fun as this one. Rock'n'Roll is theoretically as simple as they come. Guide the ball to the exit in each of the 32 included stages and that's pretty much it. Bada beep, bada boom, you won. It's not as easy as it sounds though. Each level is a rather large maze filled with various traps and environmental dangers like sliding doors, laser beams, magnets, explosions, acid tiles and single-use platforms. Not all features are there just to kill you though, so there are also tunnels and teleports to help you get around the maze. And various pickups like color keys to open similarly colored doors, diamonds for points and money. Which, well, you can use to buy useful gadgets that will help you in completing the levels and in survival. There's no enemies in Rock'n'Roll to speak of, but the gameplay is addicting and incredibly fun nonetheless. I know it's difficult to believe when hearing me talk about a game where you play as a ball, but it's one of those titles that play way better than they look on the video and sound when spoken about. Run the Gauntlet is a gamified version of 1980s TV show of the same name that placed 4 teams from different countries against each other in series of hazardous challenges. The teams you got to choose between are Great Britain, USA, Holland and Australia. I've never seen the show, but I suppose that these were the teams that participated in it most often. The game can be played in multiplayer, but it's alternating, so you'll never directly compete with a friend head to head. Which is a bit of a wasted opportunity if you ask me, but whatever, at least you get to keep that friendship and not end it over a video game. The gamebox boasts of 9 different events, when in reality there's only 3, but you get to compete in them in various vehicles, so there's that at least. Your goal is the same regardless of the vehicle though, so let's stick to there only being 3 really. In first you'll be racing various boats and hovercrafts over a river, navigating between buoy gates. There are obviously obstacles there that will slow you down, so try to avoid them, if you can. If you can't, at least aim not to lose. Then there's their off-road racing, which believe it or not is a carbon copy of the previous event, only not on water and without gates. So if my math is correct, we're down to 2 events only. And finally, third is an obstacle course that will put your wheel and joystick to the endurance test in equal degrees. So as you might have guessed, it's a joystick waggling bonanza, with several different obstacles to jump or climb over. And that's it really. Run the Gauntlet is not great, especially that there's realistically only 2 events in it and one's bound to cost you a joystick and a carpal tunnel syndrome. Not necessarily in that order, but it's not unplayable, and I will argue that it's a good palette cleaner between other games during a retro evening with friends. How would a child between Commando and Green Beret games look like if it would only inherit only the passing resemblance of its parents? Like our game on display, SAS Combat Simulator. It's a title that rolls both classics into one and makes them a little bit less fun to play. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it's a bad game, it's just nowhere near as good in each of its parts as compared to originals that it copied. But if you wanna run around a bit, shoot some buddies and like variety in your gameplay, it can provide it, no doubt about that. And since it was released by Codemasters, you know that it was discount title through and through. And if you bought it, you still had enough money for another game, most likely also one of Codemasters, which could be a hit or miss, if I'm to be honest here, as they had some classic under their wing as much as some real stinkers. SAS Combat Simulator is fun, just not as fun as it could have been with an extra month or so of work. Despite its title, Shark does not place you in fins of a deadly underwater 15-footer. It's a multi-directional flick-screen cavern shooter similar to much more well-known Cybernoid. Story-wise, you're traversing underwater caves and installations searching for and destroying enemy alien forces that seized control of the underwater base. You're armed with a gun and have access to limited supply of rockets and mines. The latter are mainly used for exploration purposes to clear obstacles in your path. Since you're underwater, your craft falls down, or descends really I should say, continuously, so you have to counteract it constantly too. That said, if you'd like to go downwards, there is no way of rushing it, it can only go as fast as its natural descent pace is. So that kinda freed a downward joystick movement, which is now utilized to switch to those extra weapons. Enemies are not very adventurous or aggressive, and they usually only move around their pre-assigned paths. There's 3 levels in the game, and as far as I remember, they don't cycle around, so when you're done with them, it's game over. For better or worse. Graphics and sounds are pretty nice, and overall Shark is a decent simple shooter. It's not as good as Cybernoid I mentioned initially was, but given its original budget release method, it was well worth the price it retailed for. Sega's arcade port of Shinobi on C64 is superb. It's a side-scrolling action arcade beat-em-up where you play as Joe Musashi, who has to battle his way through numerous levels rescuing hostages. Kinda like Man-Bat used to for a living whenever Joker and Penguin kidnapped innocents or whatnot. I'm Batman. What? Is it really that important? Okay. Batman's asking me to tell you that Riddler and Mr. Freeze also used to keep hostages from time to time. So here you go, a bit of Bat trivia that's most likely never going to be useful to you. Anyway, you're armed with bazillions of deadly shurikens and even deadlier tools of destruction, so your explosive punches and world-shaking kicks. Clearly something you've learned from Chuck Norris. Realistically, they may neither explode nor shake anything, but they're extremely effective at disposing of the enemy scum. There's also quote-unquote bomb-like ninja magic that clears the screen of all enemies, but good-hearted bad boys such as yourself, my awesome viewer, would never resort to using those final means of annihilation unless left with no choice, now would you? Are you crossing your fingers while saying you wouldn't? Really? Oh man. Anyway, Shinobi features all levels found in original and even the famous bonus stage in which you're throwing shurikens inwards at the screen at approaching enemies. Graphics and sounds are beyond excellent, perhaps not on the arcade level, but as good as it was possible to achieve on C64 in 1989. So if you played Shinobi in the smoke-filled arcades and then had a chance to experience it at home on C64, you wouldn't be disappointed. Arcade conversions in late 80s to small and rapidly aging 8-bit systems were often hit or miss. And our shuriken spewing hero is definitely a sterile example of how such ports should be made. Easily one of the best games on the system. Speaking of ports from arcades and some of the best games on C64, Silkworm. Or Silkworm, I can never tell. Just a mere year after Silkworm landed in the arcades, C64 got its port, and oh boy, what a glorious piece of adrenaline-rushing software that was. On the surface, it's a simple standard horizontally scrolling shooter in which you go from left to right, defeating seemingly infinite waves of various enemies, finding power-ups, smart bombs, invincibility, and fighting huge-ass end-level bosses. It's worth noting though that they're not as difficult as the rest of the game is, which is quite odd, I must add. All that coupled with nearly arcade-perfect presentation, sounds and graphic-wise, well, at least to the level C64 could achieve, makes for an incredibly fun, even if really punishing gameplay. But that's all on the surface, because obviously, as most of you know, Silkworm's biggest and best feature is its simultaneous two-player mode, when one of you flies a copter while the other drives a jeep. It was a unique at the time concept and a very playable one at that, especially that not rarely my friends and I would get into stupidly long arguments who would play as copter, as it was much easier than trailing behind in a jeep. Still, even those arguments were part of a fun, part of atmosphere and the whole Silkworm shebang. If you never played it and are watching this video, I don't believe you, you must be lying, but if you really never played it, do it. But only if you get someone to play it with you, as even though it's fun alone too, it's just not the same. SimCity. What could be said about this game that haven't been said before? It's a triple threat, a legendary title, a first in its own genre, and it was made by legendary now developer and designer Will Wright. On an odd chance that odd one or two of you don't know what SimCity is, I'll try to explain. It's a city building simulation in a top-down overhead view where you build from ground up and manage expansion of your city. You're responsible for any and all infrastructures, road and railroad layout and development of all residential, commercial and industrial zones. In fact, the RCI meter named after these zones have been a staple land demand and development marker for majority of games in the genre. And since we're on the subject, release and eventual popularity of the game, SimCity spawned the whole genre of city building simulations and set Maxis on a path of releasing non-linear simulations of various often unimaginable and creative kinds. At the time of its release, SimCity offered unprecedented depth and unknown at that point to gamers of 1989 gameplay loop of simming and designing. You have to make sure that all individual power lines are connected, that buildings, zones and services are placed next to roads, and that residential areas are nowhere near dirty and polluting industries. It's your responsibility to make sure that there's appropriate police and fire department coverage, that there are schools, hospitals and parks within your city limits. You become a de facto and omnipotent city planner only limited by the city budget and your imagination. It's an amazing title and worth playing even today. Have you ever dreamed about being a spy? I mean, not like going to spy high school, then college and then just becoming one, cause that's not how it happens. Or does it? I don't know really. If you do, let me know in the comments below. I'm curious. It's not for me, it's for friend. Yeah, a friend. But have you considered how fun, glamorous and action-packed it would be to be one? Spy that is. I mean, we've all seen the movies, some of us read some books even, we know how it is, right? Fast cars, beautiful women, big and small guns and tons upon tons of gadgets for any situations you may need them to save you from. Explosives in pants, cameras in shirt buttons, pistols in belt buckles, lassos in butter knives, cell phones in shoelaces, the likes. Oh, it would be so grand to be a spy. But since I'm a bit older now and clearly not a spy, well, come to think of it, even if I was one I couldn't tell you anyway, so... I'm Batman. What? Oh, okay. Batman said that he would tell you, cause he's the world's greatest detective and his bat code prevents him from telling bat lies. So, yeah, see, I'm definitely not one. But thanks to amazing 100% true to life and based on real facts only simulations like Sly Spy Secret Agent, I got to at least feel like one for a minute. Sly Spy was designed with the help of former spies from US, UK, Russia, Cambodia and Wakanda, to paint the experience as realistically as it was possible. And the simulation was born. Don't fact check it, it's unnecessary, I've never led you astray, have I? So you start the game, simulation, free falling from the sky fighting off bodies before eventually parachuting to safety. Soon after, you're in a motorcycle chase just to end up underwater with razor sharp harpoon a minute later. And that's just scratching the surface. Life of a spy has never been so much fun. The action and missions you'll partake in are simulated to excessive detail down to all the shootouts, bodies piling up and even an ever-present secrecy, and divided into easily accessible and completable sequences that vary quite considerably, and will keep you at the edge of your seat all throughout. It may seem to you when you indulge yourself in its glorious fun, however, that Sly Spy is a bit easy for a simulation, and one could risk saying that perhaps it's dumbed down to serve the masses, or even worse, just an arcade game. But I assure you that it's one-to-one mirror image of what real spy's life truly is. Just think about it. How often you've seen a spy protagonists die in the movies, or not end up overcoming overwhelming odds, or not coming out unscathed from potentially deadly situations. See, spies in real life always win, and that's why they win in Sly Spy Secret Agent 100% True to Life Simulation 2. Once again, don't fact check me on that, or I will have to send Batman on a super secret mission to where you live. For no reason, don't worry, he'll just get there to say hi from me. Snare is an arcade top-down puzzle game in shooter's clothing. It's composed out of 20 big levels, and all you really need to do is find the exit teleport from each to move to the next. Story-wise, it's said that whomever completes all of them will find a mysterious and valuable item at the end. I can pretty much promise you that there's nothing there. I mean, Batman finished the game more than once, and all he ever got out of it was stress and raised blood pressure from all the near-deaths he barely escaped. Since we're on a subject, there's quite a few different enemies, and they all behave uniquely. You can shoot them though, so as long as you're good with your aim, you should be alright. The first levels lure you in with easy level design and a lot of shooting, just to drop you in the deep water soon after. So very quickly you'll find yourself scouting the levels for various switches to complete the switch puzzles and navigate complicated corridors full of special tiles, some of which have unique functionalities that can harm or help you. There are also numerous power-ups like skip lever or extra lives, but they only stay on the screen for a short while, so should be scooped as soon as you can before they disappear. Oh, and they are activated after you complete the level you found them in, so keep that in mind that they're not instantaneous. Snare is fun, and even if it's not absolute best arcade puzzler on C64, it's definitely out there with the best ones. Space Rogue is one of the most unique games on C64. The end. Now watch the video and figure out why yourself. You really thought that I'm gonna leave you there hanging, didn't you? You know I wouldn't do it to you. I mean, could someone who shelters homeless Batman, yes, plural, be as heartless to treat anyone like that? Don't answer. Perhaps it's best I don't know what you think. Anyway, Space Rogue is a space combat simulation and RPG hybrid with some trading mixed for good measure. Your mission is to find the evil Manchu raiders who destroyed your original ship and take revenge for all the deaths of your crew members. If you simplify it to the most basic of motivations, that is. In reality, you'll be traveling numerous space systems, interacting with various characters, fulfilling many quests for them, usually ending with a substantial or helpful rewards. You'll fight in space against various kinds of enemies, you'll trade, and generally speaking, you will live your best modern sci-fi space life. Though it's not gonna be sci-fi to you, since you're gonna be experiencing it in real time. It's sci-fi to us, sad sots just sitting here and watching videos about it. And all that while working towards completing the game's main story. Your ship is fully upgradable and you should take advantage of that, equipping it not only with the best weapons but also devices that would extend its capabilities. For instance, make it stealthier, which I don't have to tell you will be incredibly handy all throughout the game. There are various factions within the universe of Space Rogue and you have a separate reputation with each of them. It is based on your actions and will change as you play depending on who you help, fight and how you behave. Space Rogue is kinda like much later Frontier but on a considerably smaller scale and with a storyline. If you like space operas and are a sci-fi nut, Space Rogue is easily one of the better games in the genre on C64 and of 1989 overall. If you're not a nut, then congratulations. It seems it just may be me being crazy. While first Speedball was not as well known or polished as its successor was, it was still really fun and based around earlier iteration of uniquely designed futuristic sport. A mixture of handball and hockey that rewarded violent and aggressive play. The game is played by two teams on an enclosed pitch with a goal at each end. There are two pillars that bounce the ball and change the speed and direction it's going, and a hole in the middle of each side of the court, teleporting the ball between them. They serve as sort of randomness-inducing element during matches. Speedball can be played in two modes: Knockout, where you face increasingly tougher teams, and League, which, well, obviously allows you to play out a league season. During matches, coins and power-ups appear randomly on the field. Coins can be used between matches to permanently upgrade your team or buy bonuses. Power-ups, however, only work throughout the match they appeared in. And finally, the game is won by the side that scored the most goals. Naturally, as with most games that have multiplayer built in, Speedball is also best played against friend rather than versus CPU. And if you want to end a particular friendship and don't know how, invite them in, fire up Speedball and beat their asses 5-6 times in a row. I can pretty much guarantee that that friendship is no more. You can quote me on that. Spherical is an arcade puzzler very similar to Solomon's Key, but unique enough to stand on its own legs as its own game. You must guide the ball through each level to the exit, marked as in, by creating and removing blocks in its way. You have no way of influencing the ball's movement other than by the use of these blocks, so you make sure to take care and lay them out correctly. Fortunately, before the ball starts moving initially, you have 20-ish seconds, so it's good to get to it straight away. There are some enemies on most levels and they obviously should be avoided, and there are also bonuses, which can make or break your game. So judging when and where to go and what to skip is crucial. Spherical takes a little while to get used to and understand, but when you do, it's a hell of a game, and fun time well spent. Easily one of the most creative puzzlers of 1989. I love everything Star Trek. Well, perhaps apart from Star Trek Prodigy, but that's the only outlier. Anyway, like I said, I love Star Trek. Now, back in 1989, to be quite honest with you, I'm not sure if I fully grasped what it was all about. So, sadly, I've never played Star Trek The Rebel Universe on C64. Everything I will say about it then will be based on what I found online. Keep that in mind. Story-wise, for whatever the reason, many of the Federation starships have mutinied and joined Klingons, so a plan is formed to stop the spread of it, and it involves wrapping the entire area of space in so-called Klein sphere, sealing it off forever. Which, if I may add, sounds totally not like Starfleet. Perhaps something Section 31 could attempt, but not Starfleet. Still, that's what the plan was. But before pulling the trigger on an inescapable sphere, it was decided to send the flagship, the Enterprise, to figure out what's the reasoning behind all the defections and to find a solution less drastic than the sealing off entire region, which when in place could have caused an all-out war with the Romulans. I gotta tell you that while some things here don't sound very Star Trek-y, for the lack of a better word, the whole premise is really interesting and I would have loved to play it. The Rebel Universe is a graphical adventure with real-time space combat and flying and interesting, even if bit oddly telegraphed away missions. Although while working on solving the mind control crisis, oh dear, did I just spoil a plot a bit? Anyway, while working on solving the situation, you have to keep the Enterprise in tip-top shape, with both impulse and warp drive charged, and ship structure unscathed. Which is not as easy as it seems, as there have been catastrophe pods added to many of the systems that you visit. They're the alien Spore X of sorts, and they can infect the Enterprise when it enters the system, hatch in 5 weeks and in the worst case consume ship's superstructure, destroying it. So they need to be periodically removed at so-called orbital discontinuums. Rebel Universe sounds like a game I would like, and if I ever have enough free time to play it, I'll make sure to do so, as at least on the surface it seems like fun. Although Starflight originally released on PC in 1986, C64 got its version much later in 1989. It was worth the wait, however, as it's excellent. In essence, Starflight is a sandbox space exploration, trading and combat game. Starflight kinda was like Star Trek, where you have no set path to follow, meaning you can divide your time freely between mining, combat and alien diplomacy. As the time passes by, an overarching plot slowly emerges, and you discover that there was an ancient race of beings that came back and it is causing stars to flare, destroying all living creatures. Starflight was a critical success and was universally praised for its quality when released. It was also a very complex game where you had to take many factors into consideration. For instance, the crew that you hire at the beginning of the game for various positions on your ship had to be chosen keeping their base stats in mind so that they would be a good fit for tasks that they would then carry out later on. Those skills could be raised, however, by means of training, so even a misfit in time could be transformed into valued crew member. The game consists of 270 star systems of 800 planets in total, up to 8 per each star. All systems can be entered and planets landed on, even those with gravity over 8G, where your ship would destroy upon landing from stress and structural damage. So, keep an eye on where you go and what you do at all times. Starflight is probably one of the most unusual and interesting titles released in 1989 on C64. It's not for everyone, but it definitely influenced a whole genre of space-based games that came out since. Storm Across Europe is probably the best grand strategy wargame SSI has ever released on C64. It simulates World War II in Europe and places you in control of land, sea and air units along with management of resources, research and unit production. It features 6 historical scenarios and they're called after the period of war they started in and represent factual real spread of power during conflict in Europe. It also adjusts research, raw materials and unit placement as it was. The game covers a whole map of Europe, from northern Africa all the way to Scandinavia, divided into countries and this in turn into smaller regions of strategic importance. Units that you control are not singular because of the scope of the game and represent whole squadrons, brigades and fleets and all together form your armies. Did I mention that you can research atomic bombs? You can, but whether that's something you should do or not is entirely up to you. Storm Across Europe is played in turns, with each of these representing 3 months of in-game time. So while it may seem initially that the game can be completed quickly, if you're not gonna dramatically win or lose early on, it will take a long while solely because of the scale of it and how much you can do in it. While Storm Across Europe may not be the best or even in the top 20 grand strategy games today in 2023, in 1989 it was easily the top spot. And if you like those kinds of historical strategy titles, it's really fun even today. Stormlord is an action platformer with adventure elements. You're the titular Stormlord, but despite what it sounds like, not Thor. This is not MCU. We have Batman here. I'm Batman. Yes you are, buddy, yes you are. Anyway, you have to save fairies living in your kingdom from the grasp of an evil witch. So, in each level you have to find a certain number of these and free them. To do so, you'll need to defeat the enemies as much as solve some minor puzzles by use of many objects that you'll discover on your way. Most of the puzzles are pretty simple and have very obvious solutions, like having to use the honeypot to lead the bees away from the fairy that they're guarding and the likes. Stormlord is not the easiest of games, but it's pretty fun and definitely worth completing. Graphics wise, it's absolutely top quality that the C64 could offer in 1989 and has a nearly very early 16-bit look to it, with a lot of attention given to all the character and enemy sprites. Backgrounds are a bit disappointing though, but I suppose you can't win them all, can you? Sounds and music are great, Sid really stretches its muscles with this one and it plays great too, even if it feels a bit repeatable at times, having to take same routes quite often, seeing the same things. So if you like adventure platformers, Stormlord is definitely worth tracking down. If you don't, then well, I can't help you really, you have to make up your own mind about it. Give it a try at least, I'd say though. Street Rod is a very unusual and unique title for the year. In basically all iterations of it, so this, C64, Amiga and DOS, everything about it is great, but the racing. So something that most racing games really base their entire gameplay on. Sounds odd? Well, in essence, all the game features apart from the races are quite fun. Races themselves, while not the worst, are meh at best. The main attraction here is the fact that in Street Rod you buy your own cars, take them apart, soup them up, and then challenge other drivers for money and pink slips. The money you can win can be spent on upgrades and buying new hot rods. Upgrades require disassembling and then putting back together all the necessary parts. No other game at the time allowed for freedom of tinkering and changing cars' performance to such a degree, and not many since. Pity though that the racing, so the main fare of the title, was not the best. In this, however, it reminds me of my beloved Fallout games. Most Fallouts in the series I loved, but then came Fallout 4. And while it was really fun post-apocalyptic shooter, it was a terrible Fallout and not an RPG at all. Same here, great game full of novel and groundbreaking for the time ideas and a lot of things to steal hours from you, but not a very good racer. Stunt Car Racer is probably one of the most creatively designed and playable racers of 1980s, if not the most even. The game is based around the Racing League, divided into 4 divisions. Each of these has 2 tracks and 3 drivers, including yourself, making for a total of 8 unique tracks and 12 drivers. I'm Batman. I'm sorry, what? I know, but... yeah, you're right. Manbat asked me to spare you the math, not in those words though. Anyway, every next stage you race on is a bit more difficult than the previous and often more interesting too. And it's all because the game's most notable feature are the elevated and Daredevil-worthy tracks. They are in essence differently shaped ramps and jumps raised to ungodly heights with no railings on the sides. So there is nothing stopping you from just falling off or not making into a sharp corner and jumping off the track entirely. As you can probably imagine, it adds a lot to the excitement of racing and requires skill to master. Stunt Car Racer also features a damage system where each bump with opponent's car or bit too harsh landing from a jump increases damage, indicated by the cracks on the car's frame. If the car takes too much of a beating, it gets totaled, and that's an instant loss of a race. The game was released on all microcomputers of 1989 and received critical acclaim for all of those ports. But C64's version is widely considered a classic and the best outing, really showing what the Commodore's machine was capable of. Super Scramble Simulator is sadly not a Super Scrabble Simulator or Super Scramble X Simulator, which in itself are games that I need in my life. So if you're a dev with a lot of time to spare, I am willing to be a free game tester. But today's title, the Super Scramble Simulator, is a spiritual successor to C64's Kickstart. so you'll need to ride an obstacle course, or quite a few of these actually, and learn how to operate the gears of the bike, correct positioning during climbs, jumps and landings, and also something that was not present in original Kickstart, namely position of your bike in relation to the track and the obstacles on it. Because other than the side view, which takes up most of the screen, there is also a smaller bottom screen, that's the aerial view showing your bike and all the upcoming hazards, so that you could dodge them accurately. Super Scramble Simulator is not a game for everyone, and not only because it tackles a very niche subject, but also because it's really difficult and will take some time to master. But if you like the earlier Kickstart, you will absolutely love this one too. Terry's Big Adventure is one of the best 8-bit microcomputer platformers and also one of the least known ones. So if you never heard of it, don't worry, you're in the vast majority. While on first glance it may look like another Super Mario clone with tile-based graphics, left-to-right scrolling levels and omnipresent mushrooms, this is really where all the similarities end. I mean, sure, it follows the typical for the time platforming tropes and may have been inspired by Mario, it's definitely its own game. Unlike Super Mario, there's no story to Terry. All you have to do is complete each of the 12 long levels, getting to the exit unscathed, which is not as easy as it may seem initially, for there are many various creatures that are out to get you, as deadly as in other games water, cause everyone knows that nothing good ever came out of water, right kids, and many more. In short, the lands in which Terry is on his titular adventure are anything but safe. Not everything is deadly though, cause if it was, it wouldn't be an adventure, but a nightmare. So Terry gets to run around collecting mushrooms, bashes and other stuff for points, and generally speaking, the lands that he's traveling are lush and pleasant to look at. Oh, and before I forget, Terry's sporting a boomerang for long-range attacks and yo-yo for short distance, which makes him anything but harmless. So perhaps it's not the creatures out to get Terry, but it's Terry hunting hundreds upon hundreds of innocent woodland creatures. That's something to ponder about. Anyway, use of very simple physics is an interesting choice for a platformer, but devs decided that it was the thing to do, and I gotta say it's more hit than a miss in my books. Though some of you may disagree. What am I talking about even? Well, a momentum, meaning it takes a little while when you run to reach the top speed, but stopping is also not instant, and you have to keep that in mind as Terry needs to slow down to a full stop. Terry's Big Adventure is a definition example of the hidden gem on C64, so if you've never had a chance, track it down, it's excellent. A villain named Snide Gaintree and his mercenaries has taken over a top-secret Air Force base in South Pacific. Said base holds a huge stock of cruise missiles, and in less than 4 hours, Gaintree will be able to seize control of them all. And that's something you my awesome viewer cannot allow. I'm Batman. Hell yeah, you are. Bruce is saying that if you're not gonna deal with it, he will. So jump in state-of-the-art for 1989 jet fighter and save the day. Oh, and did I mention that state-of-the-art from 1989 is at best obsolete and at worst ancient today? Cause there will be no jetting on your mission, I'm afraid. It will mainly be slow and methodical flick screen cavern exploring under the base that Gaintree took over. But have no fear, while you may not break the sound barrier even once and jetting is out of question in any shape or form, you'll do a lot of fighting and shooting. Enemies will come in many flavors and kinds, from simple turrets through self-propelling rocket traps to copters and the likes. But regardless of how many kinds of them there are, they will always end the same, in slowly settling pile of dust after you exploded them out of existence. And sure, to explode something may not be the phrase you hear often, or even one that exists in grammatically correct sentence, but that's what you'll be doing a lot. There are a few weapon upgrades you'll get to find and pick up, and the shield. And you should make sure to do so as they're extremely helpful on your mission. Task Force may not be great, but it's decent, which is more than enough for a fun afternoon. Thunderblade originally came out in the arcades and it was a hit there, offering fast-paced gameplay, explosive action and an interesting from-above perspective with very neat 3D effects. So naturally, a port to C64 was something I was very much into. And for the most part, I gotta say that it's not only impressive technically speaking, but also very playable. Sure, presentation takes a considerable hit when compared to the original, sprites feel a bit chunky and buildings wobble a bit in the 3D implementation on Commodore's small system, but the gameplay is all there and fun. Nearly everything that the arcade offered seemed to be converted down and available, from all the enemies and their behavior to background objects and both game modes in different levels. So from behind the copter and top-down view too. It's a hell of a port, and as you know, these often were piece poor. So if you like shooters at all, and even more so those that came from the arcades, Thunderblade is awesome. Thunderbirds is a mixture of a side-view adventure arcade and puzzling experiences. There's 4 missions in the game, and for each you're assigned a 2-man team, with which you have to pick 2 items that will help you to complete it. These are saving a man in flooded mine, shutting down a reactor of a damaged nuclear submarine, stealing a super-secret Thunderbird's arch-villain's plans, and thwarting the plot to launch H-bomb missiles. It's easy to pick the wrong items for these, so expect to repeat each couple of times until you figure out what to take and how to solve its puzzles. They're pretty fun if you're willing to excuse game's vagueness and the fact that you'll need to repeat things few times to really understand them. Although while doing that you have to make sure not to befall upon game's various dangers and hazards, like radiation poisoning or falling rocks to name a few. Thunderbird's graphics are nice, and the controls, while not the most well thought out, are not overly complicated. If you like classic adventure puzzles that are not mouse or text parser driven and more on a shorter side with some arcade elements to keep you entertained, it's not a bad game to try out. Time Soldier was my nickname in high school, as I was as stellar and well-kept lad as a soldier, but always found myself in the worst time and place somehow. While you may wonder if any of that is true, let me tell you about Time Soldier on C64, a port from a successful arcade original that's fast-paced top-down sci-fi shooter in which you play as the titular Time Soldier, who is tasked with rescuing 5 great warriors from 5 different periods of time. Sirius from the so-called Primitive Age, Laplace from the Age of Rome, Deimos from the World Wars, which is an odd name for an era, but it is what it is, and finally Altair from Future World, which is another odd name, but by now you're used to it, I suppose. Each of these is guarded by the end-level boss, which you obviously have to best. And you will, cause you're you and they're just bosses, nothing more, nothing less. It was always going to be difficult to move Time Soldier to home system, regardless of what system it was, as original used rotary controls for shooting, which allowed you for moving one way and shooting all around. It's not the case on C64, so it's best to seek for and pick up all the weapon upgrades and power-ups you can as soon as you find them, to at least counter the control issue a little with more power. Especially that the difficulty level of the original was not changed in any noticeable way, meaning you're playing as demanding game as you would have in the arcades, but using considerably less user-friendly and ergonomic controls. Still, it's a fun little title if you're patient enough to learn how to play it efficiently. Titan is a top-down arcade puzzler in which you control a small square-like object and use it to bounce the ball around the level and protect it from falling into the hazards. The ball itself you have no direct control of, kinda like in Arkanoid or Breakout. You can, however, with a bit of skill catch it by moving your box promptly over it, which will allow you to hold it and then release it in a chosen direction. Each level is filled with destructible blocks and other objects, harmless or otherwise. So there are skulls that you want to avoid, as hitting any with the ball will cost you 1 life. There are wall pieces that are pushable, certain floor tiles that will turn into walls when moved over often enough, and others. There's a lot to do here is what I'm saying. The goal is to complete all 80 levels by either removing all destructible blocks in each stage like in Arkanoid, or by finding and getting to the exit. Titan molds arcade and puzzling quite well, requiring you to both think and react fast to complete it. And if it's something down your alley, there's a lot to like here. Tom and Jerry Hunting High and Low is an average platformer that I used to love as a kid. It is obviously based on the cartoon of the same title and features 2 protagonists and the usual shenanigans. You control Jerry, who's a mouse, and you have to complete 5 levels by collecting all pieces of cheese scattered around them. Now, obviously Tom's out there to catch you. At first he will just go around observing what you do, but eventually he'll be actively chasing you around the house. If that wasn't enough, there is also a time limit that is rather unforgiving. You are not defenseless, however. In some locations you can drop a bowling ball on Tom's head or wet the floor to have him sleep on it. Neither is getting rid of him for good, but it gives you a little breather. Jerry's bouncing movement mechanics is a bit odd and requires a little practice to getting used to, so if it feels difficult to control him at first, give it some time, you'll be fine. Between the 5 side-scrolling levels there are bonus tunnel stages in which Jerry runs forwards collecting cheese and avoiding dynamite and bombs. I have fond memories of Tom and Jerry and I used to play it to death, but objectively speaking it's neither the best platformer on C64 nor even in the top 10. That said, I would still recommend anyone new to C64 to try it out. Tangled Tales is an adventure role-playing that most fans of the genre would not enjoy today, but back in the late 80s they would most likely love it to bits, as it's an RPG clearly aimed at a younger audience and an excellent introduction to those unfamiliar with the genre. It's also a game with no footage for anywhere, so you'll suffer a minute of screenshots with me. You play as an apprentice wizard who botched a seemingly simple spell terribly, and as a result caused a serious ruckus. As punishment, you're stripped of all your spells by the Master Wizard. That's pretty much the introduction, after which you start by creating your character and assigning skill points to stats of strength, intelligence, speed and charisma. A weird choice for a wizard, no wisdom or even magic, but whatever. And from then onward, you're on a mission to make amends, to regain your spells and control of magic, which you will start by fulfilling quests for your master, starting with some very basic fetch quests, just like in every other RPG out there. Since Tangled Tales is a genre hybrid with adventure mixed in, you should also remember about grabbing everything you come across that's not nailed down, as all these items may come in handy and you never know when. As you play, you'll also learn new spells, fight when required, recruit people, and earn and spend money. You know, your usual RPG fare. And while Tangled Tales is that simple, it's still a full-fledged RPG nonetheless. Tangled Tales is not a large game, it's little over 100 screens in size only, but it's more than enough to be excellent gateway to the role-playing to any new to the genre players. Take the Afterburner and change the perspective from behind the F-14 to top-down view and you end up with our next game, Tomcat. In Tomcat's worlds, in the first half of 21st century we've perfected the technology allowing us to create artificial islands. So we've got 27 more years to do so, cause as far as I know it's still mostly just dropping a lot of sand and concrete in the location we want it to be made. And it's neither easy nor affordable. With some time left, so perhaps change is around the corner. And it would be hella cool as I always wanted to have my own island. Anyway, one of those in-game islands, after meteorological phenomenon turned rogue, its computer-controlled defense systems turned on and actively attack anything and everything that comes within its reach. So you jump into F-14 and fly towards the island to destroy its defenses. Tomcat is a vertically scrolling shooter that looks and sounds pretty decent. It features nice smooth scrolling and a solid but not great gameplay. The fact that the F-14 sprite is rather large on a considerably cropped gameplay screen makes dodging shots very difficult in some situations, so keep that in mind. And since we're on the subject, all sprites could use a little bit of color too, as they're mostly grayscale. Overall, the game feels very grayish. Nice, but in very blunt color palette. You get to pick up weapon upgrades and missiles from defeated enemies, which is always helpful. Tomcat is not bad, but the fact that there's no end to it and it just circles back from the first stage after you complete the fourth without a word, so no congratulations, no thank yous, nothing, is a tad annoying. US Gold is not the name you associate with great arcade conversions. They were usually quickly put together, shoddy coded and generally speaking lacking, only made to grab some quick cash based on popularity of the IP. Turbo Outrun on C64 is awesome, however. Easily the best 8-bit conversion out there. At least when it comes to microcomputers, consoles are another beast entirely. Gameplay-wise, not much has changed, you're still racing from checkpoint to checkpoint, within the time limit and avoiding the traffic. You have your typical high and low gears, and the addition to this outing is the turbo, which may take a lot to charge up after using and gives you just a few seconds of boost, but it's a considerable speed up, and can make or break your game. So best keep it for straight stretches of the road. What made Turbo Outrun better than the previous entry is the quality of graphics, sound and fluid movement. It just plays well, so if you liked earlier game, this one's even better. Though I have more fond memories of the original. Turbo Outrun takes you from New York to LA via race split in 4 stages, with each stage splitting into 2 routes for a total of 16 different sub-stages, which adds a lot to replayability since you can pick different paths for each playthrough. I remember always feeling as a kid that C64's Tusker looked like a real movie on the screen of my TV. Today it's obviously no more than a jumbled mess of big pixels, but for the time, on C64, it was an incredible sight. And even now, compared to most other games on the system, it looks fantastic. And no wonder, as it's System 3 that stood behind it. The very one that gave us International Karate, The Last Ninja, Vendetta, Myth and Flimbo's Quest among others. Quality titles in both presentation and gameplay. Tusker's inspiration in Indiana Jones is more than obvious, not only in the lettering on the ever-present on the screen game's title, but also how our protagonist looks, the setting and how the game plays. But that's not bad, quite the opposite. Tusker, in essence, is an action-adventure game with some simple environmental puzzling, kinda like the aforementioned The Last Ninja, but a bit shorter. So you'll be killing baddies, picking up and using objects, switching various levers and switches, and solving simple puzzles. The assortment of weapons available to you is also indie-themed, so there's a machete, pistol, sling, knives, and a cult classic whip, the most iconic of indie's armaments. Tusker is split into 3 levels, desert, caves and jungle, to be precise, and tells a tale of you searching for your father, who also was an adventurer and supposedly disappeared after finding the mysterious legendary elephant graveyard in Africa. The Untouchables is an excellent tie-in to the Mafia movie of the same title and sorta follows its plot too, as best as it can at least. You play as Elliot Ness and you're after Al Capone, the infamous gang lord of the 1930s. The game is divided into 6 sections, levels if you will, and they are: the warehouse, in which you search for evidence against Capone, all the while fighting off his goons. Arrows will guide you in general direction of the evidence, held by the man dressed in all white. There's 10 pieces of evidence to grab in this stage overall. Then there's the bridge, which plays a little like Operation Wolf, so you lie on the ground shooting at incoming gangsters. Third level covers the alleys, and it's the only one that is not representing scenes from the movie in any way. You're hiding behind the wall and have to jump out to shoot the enemies. After every 2 shots you need to reload, so it's best to hide back for it to conserve HP. Fourth scene takes place on the railway station and features top-down shooter adjacent gameplay. You have 2 objectives here: shoot the gangsters and stop the baby carriage which keeps rolling down the stairway. In 5th level, you don't play as Elliot Ness, but as George Stone, and it's the shortest stage of them all. You have to save the accountant who's taken hostage by one of the gangsters, and you're given just a few seconds to shoot him. Don't hit the hostage though, as it's an instant game over. Sixth and final stage takes place on the rooftops. It's very similar to the third scene, and after you go through series of shootouts, you need to kill Frank Nitti, Capone's assassin, who's running away. The graphical and sound design of Untouchables is fantastic, and it's one of the best movie tie-ins on C64. I pondered for a while if Wall Street should find its way into this video, as I'm not sure that it's a game at all. I mean, it's hella fun, but it's more of a financial simulation rather than the game. It's a title for those who enjoy Excel sheets, bar graphs, pie charts, and series of long numbers to work on. So if you're such a person, it's a dream come true for you. Wall Street is just that, a simulation of stock market with all that it entails. So at the start, you're asked a series of finance-related questions, and based on how well you answered, you will receive a different amount of money from the investors. Money to multiply. Or lose, because it's all in your hands really. And no two playthroughs are alike, as the performance of stocks is randomized between the gameplays. Up to 4 players can enjoy Wall Street, and if you own a disc version, it even contains a program to manage your own depots. While I'm still on the fence if Wall Street is a game, if you're in the right mindset, it may be more fun than many other games are. War in Middle-earth was released for both 8 and 16-bit systems, and it's virtually the same title apart from stripping off all the questing and RPG elements on 8-bit machines. Well, if it doesn't have something, it's not the same! Perhaps, but the main fare of the game is the strategic layer, and everything else are only side elements adding extra flavor to this already pretty fun title. Your main goal, same as in the books, is to get the One Ring to Mount Doom. So if you fail by having Frodo killed or corrupted, or if Minas Tirith will fall, the game will end with your failure. This is the only adventuring part present in all versions of the game, despite what system it came out on. Other than that, it's pure strategy, with you having your armies all around the Middle-earth and Sauron/Saruman having theirs. So you order around your armies trying to secure a safe passage for the Ring-bearer and in the same time protecting the Middle-earth from evil's corrupting influence. Battles take place in real time and carry on until one of the sides is completely defeated. Each character or soldier has their own statistics, and their performance in combat is based off these. If Frodo at any given moment happens to be in combat and wants to leave it, he can use the ring to disappear, but it raises his corruption level and sends Nazguls his way, so it should only be used as the last means, when no other resolution is possible. War in Middle-earth is fun, even if not easy, as it allows you to employ a whole plethora of different strategies to complete the game. You can have all armies surround the ring-bearer and escort him, and then try storming the gates of Mordor. Or they can fight numerous battles involving the evil forces in combat, and giving Frodo a free reign to race to Mount Doom. And that's just scratching the surface. Now let me be clear here, there are better strategy games, quite a few of them actually, but War in Middle-earth has that Tolkien touch to it, and because of that, it's eerily enchanting. War Machine is a flick-screen shooter platformer. I think that 1989 was about the time that we should have forgotten about flick-screen design and focused on scrolling. Clearly, War Machine did not get the message. War Machine is a below-average game that is frustrating most of the time you spend at it. The graphics are decent, but the main character sprite is a mess. I mean, I know he's supposed to have a gun mounted on his arm, but it looks very weird, to say the least. The action is not very fast and exciting, and jumps require pixel-perfect aim, and there's a ton of them. And when I say pixel-perfect, I mean it. Many platforms also end at the edge of the screen, which you don't know until you jump through them to the next one, flicking through and ending up falling to your death. It's not a great game design if you ask me. So if you're easily annoyed, it's definitely a title to skip. Though, if you really are, you're probably not watching this video because apparently I am too. Anyway, if you have fond memories of the game, do not try coming back to it. It's not worth to spoil it. Story-wise, you have to find all 4 pieces of the mysterious weapon that can be used to defeat the evil leader of an alien syndicate. And you have 80 minutes to do so. Seems like not much, but you won't play the game for as long anyway. I'm pretty sure of that. There's also extra weapons and ammo you get to find along the way, and you have a jetpack. They're helpful, but don't change how War Machine plays, and it's not great. Wastelands is a futuristic sci-fi versus lightsaber fighting game. Conceptually, it's more similar to titles like International Karate than Street Fighter, as it features identical combatants with no unique special moves, finishers, or supernatural abilities, and it's played for points and not to a knockout. So fighters can jump, roll, kick, and perform sword attacks using joystick. Most successful hits are worth a point, with an exception of sweeps that are worth a half of it, and jumping sword attacks that are 1.5 points. Whomever scores 6 points first wins the round. Wastelands can be played in 2-player versus or tournament mode, and it's fun for what it is, especially against a friend, but don't expect it to hold your attention as long as in International Karate did. And for some reason I keep saying karate, even though I know it's karate. Odd. Wicked is Wicked. It's a real-time strategy with horror and occultist theme and undertones. Unknown evil forces of darkness want to conquer and cover the earth in eternal dark. You, as a force fighting for good, have to stop them by driving them back where they came from. To do so, you have to purge clean all 12 astrological signs, each consisting of 3 levels filled with bodies. Although that's probably not the best word for them. The goal is to multiply plenty enough of your spores to overrun all evil portals before the enemy manages to overwhelm you with theirs. So you'll be shooting enemy spores to halt their growth and reduce their spread, but you also use picked up seeds to create new, for the lack of a better word, good portals that release your spores at strategically picked spots. You have to be quick, however, as the Evil Guardian spits out new spore seeds too, which, if not collected in time, create new evil portals. If you manage to cover all enemy portals with your spores, you win the stage and move to the next. From time to time, tarot cards will appear, and when picked up they can offer positive or negative boons. And you'll need to learn to recognize which are which to be successful. Wicked is played in day-night cycles, and it's considerably more challenging during nighttime. It is also when Evil Guardians are invincible and can't be tackled until the day arrives. Wicked is very unusual, and can be started in one of 3 modes, focusing on strategy, action or mixed. If you've never had a chance to play it, despite how odd it seems, it's worth giving it a go, trust me. Windwalker: A Tale from Mobius is a sequel to earlier Mobius and a fantasy role-playing beat-em-up mixture. Let me clarify that everything I will say from this point onward will be based on what I found about it online only, as I've never played it. First of all, apparently most of the main characters and game's storyline background is found in the manual only, and it's recommended to read it there before starting, which I can understand to a certain degree, but would prefer if all of it was served in-game. To give you a general idea what it is, some kind of evil Far Eastern warlord, with help of his talented and as evil as himself alchemist, deposed the Emperor and enslaved the fantasy kingdom. You have to find a way to bring back the Emperor to his throne. Most of the gameplay is your typical role-playing fare, especially that the engine used is similar to that of other Origin titles, with top-down worldview and tile-based graphics. This time, however, the graphic tiles are bigger and tend to overlap each other, seemingly for stylish reasons only. But any and all combat encounters take place in a side view, where they take form of a jumpy real-time versus kung fu fighting. It's not bad, but it's also not as good as even the basic fighters of the time were. It's a neat idea, as it's very different from tried and tested turn-based formula, but won't blow your mind. It's an interesting choice, but ultimately wrong, given how you get no experience from combat and all your XP is amassed by completing tasks. Windwalker is an unusual title, and one definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of RPGs, especially if you're into Far Eastern themes. I loved original Wonder Boy on C64. The opinions about it may be different, but I really did, and still do, and that's why I was looking forward to Wonder Boy in Monsterland. And as it turned out, it was an entirely different animal, not frantic arcade platformer, but more methodical one with role-playing elements. Arguably a better game. I don't feel as much melancholy towards it, but still really like it nonetheless. It takes place 11 years after the original, when our protagonist is a local hero and holds the highest of honors, the title of the titular Wonder Boy. Peace, however, cannot last in video game worlds forever, as if it would, there'd never be no more new games. So, a fire-breathing dragon appeared seemingly from nowhere like a Pokemon out of high grass and took over Fantasy Kingdom with his army of evil monsters. Since regular folk are not as courageous, tough and heroic as you are, the land quickly fell and turned into its shady mirror image full of demons and devils and other outworldly monstrosities. Hence why Wonderland turned into Monsterland. So, since TomTom is the Wonder Boy, and by extension of it you are too, cause you'll be in control of him, the fate of one's beautiful kingdom is in your hands. Same as the joystick that you'll use to save it. There's 12 stages in the game, and they all are converted to C64 flawlessly, in terms of their content at least. Other than one boss fight with monkeys, as in arcades they jumped in semi-random fashion, while on C64 they do between 2 static points, which makes them very easy to beat. Defeated enemies leave coins or bags of cash behind, they can be used in shops to get better weapons, shields, armors and boots. And each stage ends with a boss fight. Graphics obviously took a hit, but it was expected. They do not get in the way of game enjoyment, however, and are not terrible, just reduced in their fidelity, so it shouldn't be an issue really. Sounds, and especially music, are excellent, but you wouldn't expect anything else from Commodore's SID chip. A little very capable piece of silicon that is beloved by many to this very day. Overall, Wonder Boy in Monsterland is really fun. In my eyes. Your opinion may differ, obviously. X-Out is a superb horizontal scrolling shoot-em-up taking place underwater. An unusual setting for this as the genre goes. Which is good, cause one thing C64 was not low on were excellent shoot-em-ups. So any novelty, anything that stuck out is always worth pointing out. But that's not all X-Out introduced in its design. Instead of lives, it offered different ships, each with their own armament. There's 4 different kinds of these that you can purchase, and they are used as lives, and can be armed with weapons picked from available 12. There are also different drones and 8 types of satellites. It's a lot, is what I'm saying, and will keep you entertained for a while. So, it's only natural that you start the game in a shop and not on the playfield. and you get to visit it between all levels. The enemies are obviously all different in both how they look and their behavioral patterns, and there are fun and challenging, often gigantic mid and end level bosses too. Other than that, X-Out is your typical horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up, but phrasing it like that undermines the sheer amount of changes to the formula I just mentioned, and the game does not deserve it. So let me highlight it once more, what an incredible title it is. Easily one of the best on C64. Definitely in my top 5. Oh, and graphics and sounds are really good too. All the sprites and backgrounds are top-notch, painstakingly detailed and smoothly animated. X-Out is great, and it's a must-have in any shooter fans collection. In the arcades, Xenophobe was a simultaneous free-player side-view flick-screen sci-fi shooter, and it was, well, okay. It wasn't a huge hit, but it was popular enough to warrant itself some home conversions. Commodores being one of them. But as most conversions go, this one's also not without some cuts here and there. Most importantly to suit our TV screens, to which most of our C64s were connected. And to utilize both joystick ports, our small home outing lost the third player. Which is not a big issue if I'm to be honest, as given C64's rather large horizontal pixels, screen divided in three would jumble all the sprites beyond recognition. Anyway, story-wise, after a space station orbiting Earth sent out a distress call and then went silent, a single ship escaped it, piloted by a wounded and barely standing single man, who explained that the station was raided by acid-spitting Xenos that made a hatching lair out of it. So you, the savior of mankind and few others, are sent to deal with it. And I marvel and admire your perseverance and determination, cause just as you cleared off the seas of the aliens in X-Out, you have to fly out to space to do the same in Xenophobe, with virtually no break in between. You, or even better you and a friend, start with a standard issue basic rifle, but along the way you'll be able to pick up and wield various other weapons like phasers, lightning rifles or even bombs. Sounds great, but it's average game at best. Graphics are so-so, with many of the backgrounds feeling samey, the controls are odd and the game overall feels unsatisfying. To summarize, technically speaking, Xenophobe is fine, but graphically and in terms of gameplay it's nothing special and I wouldn't go out of my way to find it if I were you. It's a bit better when not played alone, and then it's actually quite fun, not great, but definitely fun. And that's the end of 1989. I'll start covering 1990 soon, but for the time being let me know what you think of it. Could it really be the best year for C64? Let's discuss it in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. If you didn't, well then there's thumbs down there too. But I suppose you wouldn't have persevered up to this point if you really didn't. Around 60% of you are not subscribed, and there's currently no way of knowing if YouTube will decide to recommend you the next episode or not, other than subscribing and hitting that bell, that is. And when you hit that bell, whenever the new video is out, YouTube will actually send you a small and friendly notification about it, so you wouldn't miss it. If you'd like to support the channel, Patreon and YouTube memberships are a great way of doing so. They will help me release better content, and also they get first dibs on all new videos before they're publicly accessible on YouTube. If you can't or don't want to do that though, likes and subscribes are great too. I would like to take a moment here and thank all the YouTube creators from whose videos short bits were taken to serve as a background to my commentary. They're amazing and stars among the retro community. You will find names of their channels at the top of the screen when their footage is running, and also in the video description below. For me though, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.